Chapter 85. No one at Serendue was particularly excited about the trip to King's Cross the next morning. Snape left before anyone else, heading directly to the castle. He dropped the Daily Prophet in disgust and stalked out of the kitchen, with Remus following closely behind. When the werewolf returned 10 minutes later, Snape was nowhere to be seen. Harry didn't blame Snape for being too angry to continue reading the newspaper. He himself almost set it on fire by accident. The front page, of course, declared that Minister Scrimgeour was dead. It also discussed Voldemort's takeover of the ministry as if it was simply a staffing change. It was clear that the Death Eaters had control over the newspaper as well. There went any semblance of reputable national news, though the Prophet had barely been reputable to begin with. With so little information available, Harry half expected the Aurors to come for him at platform 9 3/4, dragging him, kicking and screaming, to Voldemort under some absurd arrest warrant. However, the platform was eerily quiet, much quieter than it should have been. It seemed a fair number of students had chosen not to return, or, Harry realized with a sickening feeling, had not survived the summer. Only Sirius and Narcissa accompanied them to the platform, while Remus and Charlie said their goodbyes back at the house. The two boys drew some curious looks as they arrived together, but Harry chose to ignore them. Soon enough, people would discover that he and Draco had been friends all along. "Stay safe," Sirius murmured, pulling Harry into a tight hug. Harry hugged him back, wishing desperately that this was the first time he was being seen off to school under better circumstances. Next year, he thought. "You too," Harry replied, giving his godfather a warning look. "Keep me updated on anything important." "Will do, killer." Sirius reluctantly let go, kissing Harry on the forehead. "Love you." "Love you too." Harry allowed Narcissa to kiss him on the cheek before he stepped onto the platform, the weight of uncertainty heavy in the air. Harry felt the weight of the Malfoy matriarch's warning as she cautioned him to be careful and take good care of her son. It drew a small smile and a sincere nod from him. He noticed a cluster of redheads approaching, much smaller than usual, consisting only of Mrs. Weasley, Ron and Ginny, with Hermione walking alongside them. Harry wondered how Mr. Weasley was coping with the whole ministry situation. At least, thanks to Bill, they knew he had come through unscathed. Mrs. Weasley spotted them and shot a glare at Sirius, who simply rolled his eyes. "I think we're going to get going. Call me soon," he said to Harry, giving Draco's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "See you both at Yule, if not sooner." The two boys headed off to find a compartment, and Harry felt a surge of happiness when they discovered Luna, Daphne, and Blaise waiting for them in their usual spot. "Morning, gentlemen," Blaise greeted, his tone teasing. "Finally going public, are we?" "Just as friends," Harry replied, hoisting his trunk into the rack. Daphne snorted. "For now, at least," she remarked. Harry didn't have the energy to argue. She wasn't wrong. They didn't have to wait long for Ginny and Neville to join them. Ginny let out an exaggerated sigh of relief as she dropped into a seat. "Thank Merlin I can finally spend several months with people who are not Ron," she announced, making Harry laugh. "I'm sorry I left you to the wolves this summer," he joked, "but at least you had Neville. And Susan." Ginny glanced at her boyfriend, who blushed faintly. "Yeah, and the twins were always willing to let me hang around, even if Mum went mental at the idea of me being in Diagon with things as they are." As the train started to move, it jolted Harry against Draco's side. "How's Amelia doing anyway, Nev?" he asked, noticing Neville's smile falter. "She was awake long enough to say goodbye before we left, but she wasn't up. For coming to the station," he relayed. "Gran has called a healer friend of hers to come check on her, though." That was a relief. Snape might have extensive knowledge of the dark arts and potions, but he wasn't a trained professional, and they didn't want to risk overlooking anything. The questions prompted Harry to explain to the others what had happened the night before. They only knew what they had read in the Prophet. As with the previous year, the journey to Hogwarts was filled with visitors, many of whom looked surprised to see Draco sitting so comfortably beside Harry. In truth, there weren't many of their friends who didn't know the truth by now. Far too many of them simply looked smug at the sight of the pair. Susan and Theo were among the first to visit. Susan's face looked a little drawn. Harry shuffled over to make room for them to sit. "Neville said your aunt woke up?" he asked. Susan nodded. "I hated leaving her like that, but she said she feels okay, just tired. I suppose I have Professor Snape to thank for that." "I think he'd prefer you never mention it again, to be honest," Draco drawled, making Susan giggle. "We have some other news," Theo said, holding Susan's hand, his hazel eyes bright. "I got a letter from my family solicitor this morning. My father was one of the people killed at the ministry yesterday." Harry tensed. What could he possibly say to that? Theo seemed to sense his dilemma and flashed a shark-like grin. "Don't apologize. He was a piece of work and he deserves to be dead. But the better news is, once I turn 17 in January, I'll be free." And like most foolish Death Eaters, his will handed both my guardianship and the house proxy over to Lord Malfoy, which, in his absence, goes to Lady Malfoy. He turned his grin on Draco. "Looks like we're foster brothers until January." Draco laughed. "Congratulations. Welcome to the family, I suppose." "I can go back home," Theo continued. "When this is over," Theo said, his voice filled with awe. "I'm happy for you," Harry replied sincerely. Theo nodded. "I wouldn't have lasted this far without your protection, Harry," he said, his tone solemn. "I'm in your debt." "There are no debts between friends," Harry corrected him, smiling. Theo blinked, then slowly returned the smile. "Okay then." "Have you heard from the girls?" Blaise interjected, frowning. Theo shook his head. "I got a letter from Millie a week into summer, but nothing since. Ever since Draco and I defected, I think her dad is reading her letters." Harry noticed Draco tense beside him. "I hate that we've left them to deal with Crabbe, Goyle and Tracy Davis." "You and me both," Theo agreed. "But they're safer that way. We all are. The Dark Lord needs to feel like he has some kind of foothold in the school." "Did Susan tell you about—" Harry trailed off and Theo nodded. "It doesn't surprise me that the Ravenclaws got turned first. They've always been closest to Slytherin. We'll have to keep an eye out." Harry knew there would be more students in all houses with parents who had turned, and possibly even some who had made the choice independently of their families. He wasn't naive enough to think that Voldemort's rhetoric didn't appeal to certain people, especially those tired of Albus Dumbledore's nonsense. This year, Harry was determined to change that. He wanted to offer an alternate option, and perhaps save a few souls from being marked. When the trolley came around, Susan and Theo left, promising to send everyone's regards to the Hufflepuff contingent. Harry noticed both of them had their wands out when they returned to the corridor. It was a sad reality that even the train to school felt like a potential battleground. Most other visitors didn't stay long, just popping their heads in to say hello. There were no questions about anyone's situation. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension, far from the carefree summers or light-hearted complaints about returning to classes. Everyone knew their summers had been anything but joyful, especially after the events at the ministry. Bigger problems loomed than just schoolwork. Harry noticed the hardened gazes of his friends, their smiles tight and shoulders slightly hunched, a reflection of the weight they all carried. Lavender was the most upbeat of the group, expressing her gratitude for the flowers Harry had sent her and congratulating him on his owl results. It felt like a lifetime ago, and he had almost forgotten about it amid everything that had transpired since. A few friends paused long enough to ask about the upcoming year, but Harry had little to share. He wasn't supposed to know that Snape was the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and he had no idea what his schedule would look like. All he could offer was a non-committal, "We'll see." He was starting to feel overwhelmed, even considering putting up a privacy ward on the door, when a knock interrupted his thoughts. Sully poked his head in. "Hi, guys," he said, a smile flickering across his face. How is everyone?" "You look like you have something to say, Sullivan," Luna remarked airily, ignoring his question. Sully chuckled softly. "Never could get one past you," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But yes, I've been talking to Tonks a lot this summer, about some stuff, and I think I'm not a boy." He bit his lip, anxiety evident in his expression. "Or a girl. I'm somewhere in the middle." "Okay," Harry replied slowly, observing the fidgeting Ravenclaw. "So, do you want to switch pronouns sometimes, like Tonks? Or are you okay with he, but just wanted us to know?" The books he'd read over the summer had opened his eyes to the complexities of gender, and he was struck by how little he had considered it before. "I want to use they/them pronouns," Sully said. "So you say they and theirs instead of he or his." He glanced at Neville and Ginny, who were listening intently. Confused looks exchanged among the group. "Sounds good," Draco agreed, turning back to his book. Sully blinked, startled. That's okay?" "Of course," Luna beamed at them. "We just want you to be happy." "I've never really heard of that before, but I'll try my best to remember," Ginny added. "And if anyone gives you trouble for it, send them my way, okay?" Sully's frame visibly relaxed, and a wide smile crossed their face. "Thanks. Thanks." "I've got some books back home you might like if you want to borrow them," Harry volunteered, glancing around the compartment. "Or if any of you want to take a look to understand things a bit better." "That would be great, Harry," Neville said, quietly relieved. He looked up at Sully. "Like Ginny said, I don't really know what that means, but I'll do what I can to make you happy. And I'll apologize now if I slip up or say something I shouldn't." "Oh no, it's fine," Sully assured quickly, their eyes wide. "It's unusual, I know, and it'll take some getting used to, but I've never felt comfortable being a boy. I didn't really know why until I met Tonks, and I'd like to see if this feels better." They all laughed. "I still slip up sometimes. I'm not expecting you all to be perfect." "Then I'm glad you and Tonks met," Harry said with a grin. "Me too," Sully replied softly. "And thanks for getting me out of my parents' house. They sent a howler once they realized I was gone. It was pretty brutal." The group frowned, and Ginny, being the closest to Sully, reached out to squeeze their arm. "That's rough. I'm sorry," she murmured. Sully shrugged. "It's about what I expected, how I've let the family down, how I should be smart enough to recognize what the winning side is, all that." "You are smart enough," Daphne remarked with a smirk. "That's why you're here with us," Sully grinned back. "That's exactly what Theo said." Suddenly there was a knock on the door. A timid third-year Hufflepuff girl peeked in. "Hi, sorry, I'm supposed to give these to Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom," she said breathlessly, awe shining in her eyes as she handed parchment to Harry. Then she glanced at Draco and squeaked, "Oh." Her wide brown eyes darted around the entire compartment. "Wait, are you Blaise Zabini?" Blaise nodded, looking baffled. "There's one for you, too." She handed over the scroll and then disappeared. "Well," Sully murmured, "on that note, I'm out before I get dragged into any of your weird shenanigans. See you later." They left before anyone could protest the shenanigans comment. Harry frowned down at the scroll and opened it. As he read, his heart sank. "So it begins," Draco said amusedly, kissing Harry on the cheek. "Who's Professor Slughorn?" Neville asked, staring at his own scroll in confusion. "What does he want?" "New defense, Professor?" Blaise presumed, and Harry grimaced. "Not quite. Potions." The dark-skinned Slytherin's head snapped up. "Does that mean—" "Yup," Neville groaned quietly. "Just when I thought I was rid of him," he said in despair. Harry chuckled. "He's not all bad." "You have to say that. You're dating his godson," Ginny retorted mutinously. "Well, have fun at your lunch date, boys." She kissed Neville and then shoved him to his feet. Harry very much did not want to go, but he had promised Snape he would try to get on Slughorn's good side. So he pecked Draco on the lips, and the three of them left the safety and peace of their compartment, heading into the train corridor. Harry had expected the staring, the whispering, and the not-so-quiet comments. Harry found himself caught off guard, not by the rumours swirling about his sanity, his potential descent into darkness, or his supposed feud with Dumbledore, but by the unexpected giggles around him. "Looks like you've still got fangirls, mate," Neville teased, nodding toward a group of fourth-year Gryffindor girls who were giggling and fluttering their lashes at him. "Hello, Harry," one girl said boldly, her friends erupting into even more laughter. "I'm Romilda Vane. You should come sit with us." "Sorry, places to be," Harry replied casually, hurrying past their compartment. He shot a glare at Blaise and Neville when they snickered. When they reached Slughorn's compartment, they discovered they weren't the only ones there. Marcus Belby from the Slytherin Quidditch team was present, along with, to Harry's dismay, Cormac McLaggen. Great, he thought. Maybe he was about to hear more of the bragging about Tiberius Ogden that Vicky had complained about. "Ah, Harry, my boy," Slughorn greeted him warmly, as if they were old friends. The portly man, mostly bald and with flushed cheeks, seemed surprisingly spry for someone who had taught Tom Riddle. But then again, Harry mused, wizards aged differently. "Delighted to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." He shook Harry's hand enthusiastically. "Come in, come in. Ah, and you must be Mr. Zabini. You look just like your mother. And Mr. Longbottom, of course. Glad you could all make it to my little party." The only one who appeared even remotely pleased to be there was McLaggen, which didn't bode well. Harry shuffled in and took a seat between Blaise and Neville. It seemed Slughorn had come prepared. A small buffet lunch was laid out, and the new professor encouraged them all to grab plates and napkins. "Please, help yourselves. I don't know if you know these fine gentlemen joining us." Slughorn introduced Belby and McLaggen, neither of whom seemed particularly impressed by Harry or his friends. Harry picked at the food while Slughorn continued his conversation with Belby, but it came to an abrupt halt when Belby admitted he didn't have much contact with his supposedly famous uncle. That was one person who likely wouldn't be receiving an invitation to the next gathering. If only Harry could be so fortunate. McLaggen seized the moment to brag about a hunting trip he'd taken with his uncle Tiberius, but things took a turn for the awkward when he mentioned that Rufus Scrimgeour had also been on the trip. An uncomfortable silence filled the air until Slughorn cleared his throat. "Well then, "You, my lad, need no introduction," he announced, turning to Harry with a chuckle. "They're calling you the Chosen One now. Well, at least some of the time. It seems the Prophet can't quite make up its mind about you." Harry forced a smile, stabbing a little too hard at a piece of pheasant. "Of course, the Prophet has been known to print mistakes in the past," Slughorn continued. "But after what you and your little friends got up to at the Ministry, well, just look at how quiet they kept that. It's clear there's a real story behind it." He looked hopeful, as if Harry might share that story. Harry cleared his throat. "We stopped the Ministry from being taken. It's just a shame they tried again," he said, watching Slughorn's smile falter. Yes, terrible business, truly terrible. But the rest of the stories about you, so sensationalized. I really do wonder about them sometimes. But I asked Albus about you, of course, when I realized I'd be teaching you. He's very fond of you. The headmaster believes that with the right guiding hand, you'll go very far indeed." Harry gritted his teeth, still smiling. Dumbledore had said that, hadn't he? Well, he was mistaken if he thought Harry would ever allow him or Slughorn to be that guiding hand. Fortunately, Slughorn seemed to realize he wasn't going to get much out of Harry. He quickly shifted his attention to Blaise, asking about... The Italian boy's mother had keen eyes, making it an excruciating way to spend the afternoon. The situation was only slightly improved by Blaise's quiet, snarky commentary whenever Slughorn wasn't paying attention. Harry had nearly cursed Slughorn when he started pestering Neville about his parents, despite how clearly uncomfortable Neville was with the subject. At last, as the setting sun began to stream through the train windows, Slughorn blinked owlishly. "Goodness me, look at the time. You all had better go change into your robes." He ushered them out with a genial smile, promising to lend McLaggen a book and assuring Harry and Blaise that his office door was always open to them. It seemed Harry had passed the first test, while Neville had not. The look of relief on Neville's face suggested he was just fine with that. "Thank Merlin I'm not doing potions anymore," Neville remarked, and Harry groaned quietly. Lucky bastard. By the time the three boys returned, the rest of their friends had already changed into their robes, and they rummaged through their trunks for their own. "How was it?" Draco asked, shifting over so Harry could sit down after he had changed. Harry huffed. "About as awful as expected. Apparently Dumbledore told him I need the right guiding hand," he added, making a face. Draco sneered. "Charming. Isn't he just?" Still, Snape thought it was important to be nice to Slughorn, so Harry kept his temper in check. They didn't have any other visitors for the rest of the journey, and soon the train was pulling into Hogsmeade Station. Before they opened the compartment door, Harry slid an arm around Draco's waist and kissed him firmly. "Merlin, give it a rest, you two," Ginny exclaimed, poking Harry in the shoulder. "Godric only knows how the pair of you managed to keep this secret for so long." Harry grinned, unrepentant. "Some of us can't snog our boyfriends in the middle of the common room," Draco shot back sharply. "It's my last chance for a while. Give me a break." Despite his words, he reluctantly released Draco and followed Neville out of the compartment. Already whispers circulated about the two of them sitting together during the train ride. As they made their way to the thestral-drawn carriages, Harry noticed Ron and Hermione glaring at him from a distance. The sight of the castle looming on the horizon tightened something in Harry's chest. He hated feeling this way, especially since the castle had always been his sanctuary. He felt anger towards Dumbledore for making him feel this way. Draco discreetly squeezed his knee, a knowing look in his eyes. They walked shoulder to shoulder into the castle, stopping only at the entrance to the great hall. Harry wished he could take a cue from Luna and Daphne and kiss his partner goodbye. Instead, He settled for squeezing Draco's shoulder before they parted for their respective house tables. That small gesture sparked a wave of whispers throughout the hall. Harry took a seat between Ginny and Neville, keeping his head down. He really didn't want to know what people thought of him these days. Further up the table, Katie sat with a few of her classmates and gave him a discreet thumbs up, tapping her chest where the Quidditch captain badge was pinned proudly. Harry grinned back. Merlin, he was looking forward to playing Quidditch again. He glanced up at the head table, letting his gaze wander over the gathered staff. Snape looked as dour as ever, fully embodying his role as the hated professor. Just then, Hagrid hurried in, catching Harry's eye and offering a cheerful wink. A few other professors were also looking back at him, though none reacted. He wondered what they thought about Dumbledore's insinuations in The Prophet. The headmaster himself appeared as delighted as ever, oblivious to the tension in the air. As the new school year began, twinkling blue eyes scanned the gathering students. Dumbledore didn't glance Harry's way. Did he still believe Voldemort lurked within Harry's mind? A smirk crept across Harry's face. If only Dumbledore knew the truth. Once everyone settled in, a noticeably smaller crowd this year with a significant number of students absent, McGonagall led in the latest group of first years ready for sorting. They appeared small too. Harry felt a pang in his chest. Starting Hogwarts at such a politically charged time couldn't be easy for them. He vowed to do everything he could to keep them safe. Each time the sorting hat called Slytherin, Harry felt his heart ache a little deeper as he watched the fear wash over the face of each child seated beneath it. Even those he recognized from historically Slytherin families looked uneasy about joining the silver and green table. Harry glanced at Draco and Blaise, who both offered subtle nods. Slytherin House would not succumb to prejudice, not this year. With so few first years, the sorting didn't take long at all. Dumbledore stood to welcome everyone back for another year. Harry's gaze immediately landed on the headmaster's left hand, and he knew he wasn't alone in that observation. Snape had vastly understated the condition of Dumbledore's arm. The entire hand appeared withered, the fingers dark and lifeless. It extended beneath the sleeve of his voluminous purple robe, all the way to his elbow, as Snape had informed them. The curse magic had reached that far before the potions master managed to dispel it. What on earth had possessed Dumbledore to wear that ring? Dumbledore acted as if he didn't notice the half of the school staring at his hand, sitting down just as the tables filled with food. "What happened to him?" Ginny asked, horrified. Harry pursed his lips. "Looks like some kind of dark curse, I'd wager," he replied. The redhead narrowed her gaze at him, but wisely chose not to ask any more questions. As they ate, it seemed that everyone had an opinion about Dumbledore's gnarled hand. Harry overheard everything, from tales of a duel against Voldemort himself to some sort of ritual gone wrong. There were even whispers suggesting that he had cursed the headmaster in retaliation for Dumbledore's comments in The Prophet. That last rumour made Harry snicker. "Should I be flattered that people think I know that kind of magic?" he asked Neville in a low voice. "I don't know, Mr. 8-O's. Would it really be such a surprise?" Neville replied, amusement lacing his tone. "Hey, Potter!" came a voice from behind him. It was Zacharias Smith from the Hufflepuff table. "So what's the plan with the HA this year?" He lowered his voice slightly, but Harry still noticed several heads turning in their direction. Harry bit back a sigh. "Don't know yet," he answered, echoing what he had said to everyone else. "Give me a few days to get my bearings, okay? I don't even know what my schedule looks like yet. But please, don't spread it around. I don't want things getting out of hand." He really didn't want the entire school catching wind of the HA and deciding it sounded like a fun idea. Zacharias didn't seem impressed. He merely sniffed and returned to his food. "You're going to have to do something," Ginny said quietly, reaching past him as dinner vanished and dessert appeared. A decadent-looking chocolate trifle caught her eye. People got way too much out of the HA to want to stop now, especially with the ministry the way it is. "I know," Harry agreed, grimacing. "I'll figure something out." He wanted to keep the meetings going. Snape wouldn't be able to prepare everyone properly while still playing his role, but it felt more challenging this year with everything that was happening. Many of the HA members would likely assume that with Umbridge gone, they could be open about the club, as if it were as harmless as the Gobstones Club or the Debate Society. Harry couldn't shake the doubt that Dumbledore would allow things to continue this way, especially if he suspected Harry was turning dark. But then again, maybe Dumbledore would relish the idea of his prized pawn training the others, preparing them to fight for the cause. The thought made Harry shudder, and he suddenly lost his appetite for the treacle tart he had been looking forward to. As dessert came to an end, Harry leaned back and listened to Dumbledore deliver his customary welcome speech, trying to feign surprise like everyone else when it was announced that Slughorn would be taking over potions instead of defense against the dark arts. The hall buzzed with conversation, and Dumbledore let it continue for a few moments before clearing his throat, signaling for attention. "Now, as you all know," he said, his expression turning serious, "the Ministry of Magic is now under the control of Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters." Gasps echoed throughout the hall, and more than a few students flinched at the words. "These are difficult and dangerous times we live in, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to remain vigilant here at school. We may feel safe within these wards, but there is always darkness lurking, and we must be cautious." Several sets of eyes turned toward Harry, who remained resolutely still. Fortunately, the independent nature of the school allows us to continue as normal, despite the interference from the ministry. However, I ask that you all respect any restrictions your professors or prefects may impose. We are doing it for your benefit, even if it may seem unfair at times. And if you notice anything suspicious or unusual, please do not hesitate to notify a member of staff immediately. He smiled warmly. "The staff and I will do our utmost to keep you all safe, but we need your cooperation. I trust you will conduct yourselves appropriately, as I know you are all capable of." Harry gritted his teeth. It was infuriating that Dumbledore could stand there, smiling and assuring the students that he would keep them safe, without even acknowledging the gravity of their situation. Students in danger of falling under Voldemort's influence were encouraged to speak to a teacher if they felt threatened or worried. Did Dumbledore expect the heads of houses to take care of that? Or did he simply not care which students he lost, as long as the right ones did what he expected? How many students would still be in this hall, if not for Harry or Narcissa offering them sanctuary? That seemed to be the extent of Dumbledore's message. He bid them a cheerful good night and stepped away from the podium, signaling for the prefects to start guiding the first years. Harry glanced over at the Slytherin table, where Draco and Pansy were directing the new fifth-year prefects in their duties. Ginny hooked an arm through his, pulling his attention away. "Come on, lover boy," she murmured with a smirk. "Let's get upstairs." Harry sighed, but followed her lead. His bed in Gryffindor Tower was going to feel even colder than usual tonight. They climbed the stairs with a larger group of Gryffindors, all sleepy and full from dinner, most of them too tired to care whether Harry was secretly evil or not. In the common room, Harry smiled to himself. Despite everything, it felt good to be back. It was strange, though, with all his older friends gone except for Katie. Even stranger was looking around and seeing how small the younger students seemed, so many of whom he hardly recognized. He was a 6th year now, almost at the top of the pecking order. It made him feel ancient, watching the wide-eyed 1st and 2nd years staring at him. Stifling a yawn, he turned to head up to the dormitory for an early night, and nearly walked right into Ron Weasley. "You've got some nerve, you know," Ron declared. Harry raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" Ron scowled at him. "Coming back to school after hiding all summer like a coward." "I wasn't hiding, I was at home," Harry retorted. "Where were you all summer then? Out fighting Death Eaters?" Ron asked, his ears turning red. "I'm not the one they're after," he shot back. "How many people died because you-know-who was looking for you, "What do you want me to do, walk up to Voldemort and hand myself over?" Harry replied, frustration bubbling inside him. Ron flinched at the name. "You could at least listen to Dumbledore instead of abandoning the war. He spent all summer trying to talk to you, Mum said, and you never left your bloody house." "I am doing more for this war effort than Albus bloody Dumbledore," Harry roared, his temper snapping. "I'm not abandoning anything. I'm 16, Ron. I'm letting the adults handle things because I'm not even old enough to use magic outside of school. And I know exactly what Dumbledore wants to say to me, and quite frankly, I don't want to hear it." To Harry's surprise, Ron's gaze lifted for a moment, fixing intently on Harry's scar. "Maybe he's right about you after all," the redhead spat. "Maybe you have got you-know-who inside your head." "If I did, we'd all be screwed," Harry retorted hollowly. Then he pushed past Ron, sidestepped an indignant-looking Hermione, and stalked up the stairs to the dormitory, ignoring the eyes that followed him. He couldn't shake the way Ron had looked at his scar. It wasn't fearful, not like it had been when Ron thought Harry was possessed after the incident with his dad and the snake. It was knowing, disgusted. What exactly had Dumbledore told Ron and Hermione over the summer? Chapter 86. Harry and Neville, along with Ginny, made sure to get down to breakfast early the next morning. They wanted to avoid the endless gossip in the common room and give Professor McGonagall plenty of time to sort out their schedules. The housemistress needed to confirm with every 6th-year student that they had achieved the necessary OWL grades to continue their chosen classes at the Newt level, and both boys had some things to discuss. By the time McGonagall reached them, she looked a bit stressed. The boys caught the tail end of a discussion she was having with Lavender about the divination Newt and how Firenze would be taking the 6th years. It seemed Lavender wanted to learn from both Firenze and Trelawney this year, or more accurately, she wanted to learn from Trelawney and ogle Firenze. Harry couldn't help but smile at the sight of her huffing as she walked off to her first class. "Ah, Mr. Longbottom, congratulations on your herbology grade. I know Professor Sprout will be delighted to have you continue her class," McGonagall greeted, causing Neville to smile bashfully. "I did want to discuss some of your other choices, however. While I'm very impressed that you managed and exceeds expectations in Transfiguration, I must ask if you're absolutely sure you want to continue with the subject. The coursework is quite intense, and to be perfectly honest with you, Longbottom, I think you might struggle as the year goes on. Have you considered continuing with charms instead? Professor Flitwick has always been impressed with your work, and from what he's told me, you seem to enjoy the class far more than I can say you've ever enjoyed mine." There was no judgment in her tone, but Neville flushed. "Gran says charms is a soft option," he mumbled. McGonagall huffed in response. "But you, Longbottom? What do you think?" I like charms, Better than Transfiguration? Sorry, Professor. McGonagall's lips twitched with faint amusement. My class is not for everyone. Now, you could always continue both. Neville shook his head in mild alarm. I thought not. I suggest you continue with Charms. I will remind Augusta that just because she failed Charms, that doesn't make it a soft option. Her gaze turned pointed and Neville gaped. Evidently, his Gran hadn't shared that part of her opinion on the subject. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Professor, he stuttered, his shoulders slumping in relief. Harry grinned encouragingly at him. They both knew that only Neville's determined studying with the heirs had brought his Transfiguration grade up from an A to a low E. He had spent half the summer worrying about taking the Newt and failing miserably. McGonagall tapped his schedule with her wand to rearrange it and then handed it over. She turned to Harry, who straightened up under her gaze. Pride shone in her dark green eyes, and he fought back a grin. Mr. Potter, your owl grades were as I expected. Very well done. Thank you, Professor, Harry replied. She looked down at his schedule, frowning. This is going to be quite a busy schedule for you, Potter. Are you sure you want to continue with 7 subjects? I was actually thinking about dropping herbology. Sorry, Nev, he added sheepishly, but his friend just waved him off. I'm ditching you in potions. It's only fair, Neville joked. McGonagall nodded in approval. Sensible. 6 is still a large course load, but considering your performance in recent years, I can't see you having a problem with it. Professors Babbling and Vector have both seen your owl papers and are very much looking forward to having you in their classes. Across the table, Hermione Granger choked on her drink. He what? She spluttered, wide-eyed. But, Professor, are you saying he's taking arithmancy and ancient runes for Newt? But he didn't even take the owl classes. McGonagall narrowed her eyes, unimpressed. Mr. Potter self-studied for his owls in both subjects, which it's a perfectly reasonable pathway. He has achieved the grade requirements for both classes. But he'll be so behind. He won't know any of the things we worked on last year. As they were owl-level projects, I dare say he won't need to, McGonagall replied with a hint of primness. Hermione turned to Harry, her brown eyes filled with concern. Harry, don't be ridiculous. You'll just fall behind. They're really difficult classes. I got O's in both of my owls, Hermione. I'm sure I'll be fine, he replied calmly. That only made Hermione's eyes widen even more. You got O's? But that's not possible. I only got an E in ancient runes, she exclaimed, her voice rising in disbelief. Harry had to suppress a smirk, drawing on all his Slytherin training. Then I suggest you worry about your own class performance and leave me to mine. He turned back to Professor McGonagall, who was once again pointedly ignoring their exchange. 6 subjects sound great, Professor. I'm excited to start Newt Transfiguration. He wished he could show her his animagus form, maybe later, once he knew she was truly trustworthy. She adjusted his schedule and handed it over, a small smile crossing her features. Glad to hear it, Potter. Oh, and by the way, I have a list of hopefuls for the Quidditch team whenever you're ready to organize tryouts. She then turned to the pair across the table. Now, Mr. Weasley, I thought you wanted to be an Auror. Harry returned to his breakfast, listening with half an ear as McGonagall gently encouraged Ron to continue with potions, since Slughorn accepted students with E grades. Ron didn't look thrilled, but clearly his ambition to become an Auror won out, along with the hope that Slughorn might be less dreadful than Snape. Harry glanced down at his schedule. He had ancient runes first period. Annoyingly, that meant dealing with Hermione all in a tizzy. But on the bright side, Harry knew Draco would be in that class. After bidding goodbye to Neville, who had a free period first thing, he set off. Unsurprisingly, Hermione hurried after him. "There's no way you got outstanding in both runes and arithmancy," she declared. But Harry kept walking unfazed. "Well, that's what my results said, so I guess I did," he replied. "There must have been some sort of mix-up," Hermione insisted. Harry shrugged. "If there was, we'll soon find out, won't we? But again, I suggest you focus on your own classwork. It won't make any difference to you how well I'm doing, will it?" With that, he picked up his pace, grateful for his growth spurt, which gave him longer legs to escape her nagging. Runes turned out to be a much more enjoyable class than either divination or care of magical creatures had been. Harry was excited to study the subject properly, rather than just working on it during the summer or over the mirror with Sirius and Remus. Meanwhile, Draco was mostly entertained by Hermione Granger glaring daggers at the two of them throughout the lesson. The homework load was a bit daunting, but Harry tucked the stack of books into his satchel, thankful for the featherlight charms. Hermione kept glancing at him, as if expecting him to burst into tears at the thought of so much reading, and a 15-inch essay due on the first day. Harry ignored her, and pulled out his schedule to compare it with Draco's. "Hey, look, we've both got free periods this afternoon," he said cheerfully. "Library?" Draco suggested. "Works for me. I'm sure this won't be the only homework we've picked up by then." The crowd outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom was much larger than the one for ancient runes. Harry and Draco joined Neville and Susan, both of whom wore expressions of mild dread. "How bad are we expecting?" Susan asked grimly. Harry shrugged. He wasn't going to lie and say that Snape would be even remotely bearable. "I mean, hopefully fewer explosions than—" "Potions class," he said, causing Neville to choke on a laugh. No one had a response. Just then, the classroom door opened, and the sixth years filed in. Harry felt a surge of relief, seeing that every member of the Harry Alliance in his year was present, along with a few other students. Snape began the class with a speech that was both reverent and ominous about the dark arts, complete with graphic examples of what could happen to those who failed to show the proper respect. The fear in the room was palpable, which Harry found reassuring. They needed to be scared. They needed to take this seriously. One thing was certain. This year, they wouldn't have a teacher who would coddle them or hold their hands as they explored the darker aspects of wizarding life. Snape would make it abundantly clear what awaited them outside the castle, what life could become if Voldemort triumphed. He would just present it in a way that made it sound like he revelled in the prospect. "You are, I believe, complete novices in the use of non-verbal spells," Snape drawled, his robes billowing as he paced around the classroom. As he mocked Hermione for her textbook-perfect answer, Harry sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Several classmates were hiding smiles, relief evident on their faces. They weren't quite the novices Snape expected them to be, thanks to Harry. As tempting as it was to pair up with Draco, Harry turned to Neville instead. His friend had never quite mastered non-verbal casting. No matter how much Snape glared and sneered at Harry, they all knew he would have no trouble with the mental focus required. So the class got to work, with Snape catching every instance of a quietly muttered spell, unless, of course, it came from one of his Slytherins. Harry kept one eye on Neville as the blonde boy attempted a non-verbal jinx, while his other eye surveyed the classroom, pride swelling within him at the sight of the Harry Alliance members. Harry quickly picked up the exercise. Suddenly, A jelly-legs Jinx shot toward him, and he raised a shield instinctively. He grinned at Neville, giving him a thumbs up. That was much faster than usual for him. Snape, however, seemed at a loss for how to handle the fact that most of the class was succeeding within the first 15 minutes. He strode through the pairs, his dark eyes narrowing with each silent jinx or shield that was performed. The only students struggling were those Harry hadn't taught, including, to his amusement, Ron and Hermione. Ron was flushed a deep purple, straining to raise a shield, while Hermione had managed a non-verbal stinging hex, but it was so weak that Ron hardly even noticed it. Suddenly, Snape loomed over Neville's shoulder, and Harry saw Neville's hands start to tremble. Snape sneered. "Pathetic, Longbottom. Here, let me show you." He raised his wand quickly, but Harry was just as fast. His non-verbal shield sprang into action against Snape's burning hex, which was powerful enough to push both casters back a little. Harry's eyes widened. "That wasn't a jinx," he protested indignantly. Snape's eyes flashed. "That wasn't a jinx, sir," he corrected pointedly. Unable to stop himself, Harry smirked. "There's no need to call me sir, Professor." Several students gasped quietly. Out of the corner of his eye, Harry caught Neville's horrified gaze and saw Draco biting his lip to stifle his laughter. Snape's eyes narrowed, and Harry braced himself for the consequences. "Detention," the tall man snapped. "Saturday night, my office." That was surprisingly easy. "Watch your mouth, Potter, or you will find yourself removed from my classroom. I'm sure the Prophet would have a field day," he added in that dangerously smooth drawl. Harry schooled his face into something that resembled contrition. "Well," Snape said curtly, striding back to the front of the room, "it seems that for once in your lives, some of you have actually come prepared for class. We shall see how long that lasts." Harry glanced around, catching the eye of several pleased members of the House Alliance. It wasn't often anyone got one over on Professor Snape. With any luck, that would continue. If it meant Snape had the perfect excuse to push them all even harder, well, that was a bonus in Harry's eyes. "Did you see the look on his face when we all started casting?" one student exclaimed. "Bet he wasn't expecting that," another chimed in. "But did you see his face when Harry said that?" The class barely waited for the door to close behind Snape before they began murmuring eagerly to one another, grinning and snickering. It was a far cry from the despondent, angry faces Harry was used to seeing after a defense against the dark arts class. "Do you have a death wish?" Draco asked quietly, sidling up to him. Harry laughed. "I'm serious. Talking back to him in front of the whole class like that. Are you mad?" "It just sort of happened," Harry confessed, feeling unapologetic. "You know me. Sometimes my mouth does things before my brain can tell it not to." Draco's eyes dropped to Harry's lips for the briefest moment, and he scowled, giving Harry a clear, "Don't flirt with me in public" look. Harry just laughed again. He was interrupted by Jack Sloper, who delivered a message from Dumbledore and asked Harry about Quidditch trials. Harry grimaced. He'd need to arrange that soon before Sloper and his friend got their hopes up about continuing as Gryffindor's beaters. "Ooh, perfect timing," he murmured to himself, reading Dumbledore's request to meet him that Saturday evening. Snape's detention was proving even more useful already. Meanwhile, Hermione was just as furious about Harry's presence in the arithmancy classroom as she had been in ancient runes, even more so after Professor Vector gushed over his owl result, playfully scolding him. Harry felt a twinge of frustration for keeping his talent hidden from her for so long. Fortunately, Daphne and Padma were also in the class, giving him some friendly faces to sit with. He was relieved when his first free period finally arrived, and he and Neville headed back to the common room. It was the time slot for Care of Magical Creatures, a class Draco was taking because it would look good on his healer application. So the two Gryffindors decided to work on their homework for Snape together. Here go any hopes that there would be less homework than last year, Neville sighed as he unrolled some parchment. Harry hummed in agreement. At least this year we've got free periods to work in. Indeed, knowing there were breaks in his schedule was a relief for Harry, even though he was certain they wouldn't feel like breaks once the year fully got underway. At the very least, it would make organizing meetings with the other heirs much easier. After lunch, Neville returned to the common room looking far too smug with Parvati and Lavender, while Harry made his way down to the dungeons for potions. As expected, the class was fairly small, with only about a dozen students. Ron didn't seem happy to be there, and his scowl deepened when Harry stood to wait with Draco, Blaise and Theo. "Glad you can finally stop throwing stuff in my cauldron now," Ron teased his boyfriend. Draco smirked. "I don't know, I might do it anyway. Keep you on your toes." Harry snorted just as Slughorn opened the door, cheerfully welcoming them inside. To their surprise, there were already 4 cauldrons bubbling away, each filled with something different. Harry chose to sit with the 3 Slytherins, feeling a bit sorry for Pansy Parkinson, who was stuck with the 3 Ravenclaw boys. He also felt for Padma and Ernie, who had to share a table with Ron and Hermione. Slughorn appeared surprised by the seating arrangement, his gaze lingering on Harry for several seconds, a frown forming beneath his moustache. Harry couldn't help but wonder if Professor Slughorn thought he needed to steer Ron away from Slytherin House, especially with that enormous moustache of his. When Slughorn instructed everyone to get their books and potion kits ready, Ron hesitantly raised his hand to explain his dilemma. Slughorn simply smiled and reassured him. "Not to worry, not to worry. You can use ingredients from the store cupboard today, and I'll help you get set up. We've also got a few spare copies of old books that should do you just fine until you can get your own. Ah, Harry, my boy, would you mind grabbing Mr. Weasley a copy of Advanced Potion Making from that cupboard over there while I find some scales he can borrow?" Since Harry was closest to the cupboard, he slid off his stool and made his way over. There were only 2 copies of the book, and both looked fairly battered. He picked up the one on top and flicked it open, wanting to ensure it was in decent shape. Ron would complain endlessly if he thought Harry had deliberately given him the worse copy. To his surprise, the pages were filled with handwriting. The previous owner had critiqued practically every potion in the book, crossing out instructions and adding their own notes in the margins. The handwriting looked familiar to Harry. It resembled the scrawls he had seen all over the notes in the lab at Serendu, and on the labels of all the bottles in their potions cabinet. It was similar, but more rushed than the handwriting that had littered Harry's potions homework for the past 5 years. His eyebrows rose in recognition, and he quickly tucked the book into the inner pocket of his robe before grabbing the other copy. A quick glance revealed it was slightly dog-eared, but otherwise unmarked, so Harry was satisfied to hand that one over to Ron. With everyone prepared, Slughorn began the lesson, proudly showcasing the potions he had brewed as examples of a successful Newt education. Harry hoped Slughorn would keep a keen eye on the cauldrons. After all, Veritaserum and Polyjuice potion could lead to absolute chaos if mishandled. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of camaraderie. Hermione was on fire, expertly answering questions and basking in every smile and chuckle she earned from Slughorn with her quick responses. Harry had to stretch his neck to get a look at the 3rd potion, the one he didn't immediately recognize. As he did, the steam rising from the cauldron wafted in his direction. At first he couldn't detect much of a change in the scent, There was a hint of treacle tart, but it wasn't overpowering. Then it hit him. The woody scent of broomstick polish mingling with the familiar spicy notes of Draco's aftershave. To his surprise, they weren't coming from Draco, who sat beside him, but from the cauldron, bubbling with what was unmistakably amortentia. Slughorn's laughter, echoing over Hermione's enthusiasm, confirmed it. As Harry inhaled a little deeper, the steam enveloped him, and for a moment he felt as though he had his nose pressed against the curve of Draco's neck, just as he often did when they were curled up together. Heat rushed to his cheeks, and he glanced sideways, locking eyes with Draco. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Draco's pale skin flushed pink, and he nodded almost imperceptibly, pretending to pay attention to Slughorn. Under the table, Draco's knee brushed against his for just a moment. Harry couldn't help but grin to himself, his attention drifting back to the professor. He knew Draco was aware of the potion's effects, but having that confirmation made his stomach flutter with happiness. "Ugh," Blaise muttered under his breath, glaring at them both. Harry shot him a wink. "Sorry, Blaise. I'm sure the smell of fireworks is going to make it really hard to tell whether your cauldron is burning today," he replied quietly, snickering as Blaise's glare deepened. Potions class with Slughorn was far more relaxed than with Snape. Perhaps it was because everyone in the room had chosen to be there, or maybe it was simply the atmosphere that made all the difference. Harry was brewing the potion using the altered instructions from Snape's book, and it made creating the draught of living death an absolute breeze. Even Draco kept glancing over at his cauldron in amazement. "Tell you later," Harry promised quietly, stirring his cauldron with the additional clockwise stir that Snape had recommended. The result was a flawless draught of living death, which earned him a glare from Hermione, wild-haired and flustered after her frantic brewing process, when Slughorn praised him and handed over a small vial of Felix Felicis. "Inherited your mother's talent, to be sure," the old professor declared excitedly. My, well done indeed, Harry, my boy." As Harry slipped the book carefully into his bag on the way out, he began mentally rearranging his evening plans. "How did you do that?" Hermione cornered him as soon as they were outside the classroom. "Your potion was perfect. That shouldn't have been possible in the time allotted." "I guess I just got lucky," he replied, maintaining an utterly straight face. Hermione glared at him, huffed loudly, and stormed off, dragging Ron along with her. Once they were gone, Draco chuckled. "No, really, how did you do that?" he asked, bumping Harry's shoulder. "Don't get me wrong, I know you can brew, but that was something else." Seeing Blaise and Theo looking equally curious, Harry beckoned them into an empty classroom and pulled out the book, showing it to them. "I found it in the cupboard when I grabbed a book for Ron. Whoever owned it last made some adjustments to the instructions," he explained. "I just followed them and it worked out well." "I'll say," Theo murmured, knitting his brows together as he studied the spidery writing. "Well, that's much less interesting than you suddenly developing incredible potion-making abilities." "Sorry to disappoint," Harry replied with a chuckle, putting the book away. "I'll share it with you if you'd like." "It's fine," Blaise said, waving him off. "Better instructions won't help when exams roll around. But if you find any other useful tips in there, let us know." "Will do," Harry promised, relieved that his friends didn't seem jealous or annoyed. After all, they were Slytherins. They believed in using whatever resources they had at their disposal. Blaise and Theo said their goodbyes and headed back to Slytherin, while Harry and Draco made their way to the library. "You know who that book belonged to, don't you?" "Of course I do," Harry replied with a hint of amusement. "I lived with him long enough, didn't I? I can't believe he just left it in a cupboard somewhere." Thank Merlin Weasley didn't find it. He'd be insufferable, Draco agreed. Harry grimaced. Yes, Ron Weasley suddenly developing a talent for potions was not something they needed. That evening, Harry snuck down to Snape's quarters under the invisibility cloak just before curfew. Snape raised an eyebrow as he entered. If you've come to gloat about stealing my first lesson away from me in your little defense club, you needn't bother. I have plenty more to torture your classmates with. Harry laughed and shed the cloak. No, I'm not here about that, although you're welcome, by the way, and thanks for the detention. I got a note from Dumbledore asking me to meet him then, so now I've got a great excuse to skip. Snape frowned at that. You cannot avoid him forever. I can sure as hell try, Harry replied with a grin. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered copy of Advanced Potion Making. Does Half-Blood Prince sound familiar to you? He teased. Snape's eyebrows shot up. Where did you get that? Harry explained the events of Slughorn's class. I can't believe you left this just lying around, but I'm glad you did. I won a bottle of Felix Felicis because of you. Horace. Always fond of bribery to win friends, Snape muttered dryly. I did not leave that lying around, I assure you. The last I saw of it, it was on my shelf, right here. He gestured to the bottom corner of his bookshelf, where Harry noticed a couple of tattered-looking schoolbooks. Then how did it get into the classroom cupboard? Harry blinked, perplexed. Snape's lips twisted into a scowl. Who do we know has access to my personal quarters during the summer, and a vested interest in Ronald Weasley feeling superior to you? Harry stared at him. You think Dumbledore left it there for Ron to find? That seemed unnecessarily convoluted, and exactly the kind of plan Dumbledore might consider. Harry snorted. Well, that backfired on him, didn't it? He glanced down at the book, flicking through the heavily edited pages. Some of the recipes were so altered that he could hardly read them. He held the book out to Snape. I suppose you want it back, then? He understood how much Snape valued the few items he had left from his teenage years. Most of them had belonged to his mother. Keep it, for now, Snape insisted, shaking his head. Then he smirked. You could use all the advantages you can get, since I am no longer able to teach you. Besides, this is a sure way to get you right to the top of Horace's favourites list. My talent and your fame, he won't be able to resist. He said I'd inherited my mother's talent for potions, Harry said tentatively, watching Snape's face soften. Lily and I often adjusted recipes together. While the notes in that book may be my writing, some of them were her work. Snape's smirk returned, much fonder this time. She could never quite beat me where it mattered, however. Remus once told me she nearly did. Snape snorted. And had she, he never would have let me hear the end of it, he agreed. Keep the book, Harry, but take care of it. You don't want to know what I'll do if that text gets damaged. Harry gulped and nodded seriously. There's more than just potions notes in there, Snape continued. Some spells I created. You might recognize them. If you don't recognize one, don't attempt it without asking me first. I was a ruthless little brat at your age. Many of those spells are not safe to use. Yes, sir. Harry was already eager to read through the book properly, especially now that he knew his mother had contributed to it. For the rest of the week, Harry remained Slughorn's new favourite student, much to Hermione's outrage. One evening, when he wasn't buried in homework, Harry carefully copied every one of Snape's notes into his own, newer copy of Advanced Potion Making, at least the notes that pertained to potions. He wrote the spells in a private notebook, fully aware that Snape's warning wasn't an exaggeration. It was easier to decipher in his own handwriting, and it meant he could return the original copy to Snape during his detention on Saturday. "I didn't want to risk a cauldron exploding on it or anything," he explained as he handed over the battered book. "Also, your handwriting was even worse back then than it is now." Snape let out a quiet snort, though Harry could tell he was pleased to have his book back, his long fingers running fondly over the cover. "Thank you," Snape murmured, pocketing the book. "Now, about your detention." Harry grinned at the challenging smirk on the Slytherin's face. It was time to get to work. Harry had almost forgotten about the meeting with Dumbledore that he had skipped until the headmaster approached him at breakfast on Sunday morning, wearing a disappointed frown. "Harry, my boy," Dumbledore greeted. "I was expecting you in my office yesterday." "Oh, sorry, sir, I had detention with Professor Snape," Harry replied cheerfully. Dumbledore's frown deepened. "I asked Severus to rearrange that detention." "Oh, well, no one told me anything, so I just went." All around them, Harry's friends watched the exchange with caution. Dumbledore's lips pressed into a thin line. "I suppose I can forgive the miscommunication, my boy. I really must speak with you, though, perhaps this afternoon." "Surely I haven't been back in classes long enough for you to have anything to discuss with me, Professor?" Harry feigned ignorance, trying not to smirk as the twinkle in Dumbledore's eyes faded. "It's not about your classwork, which I'm sure is quite satisfactory." "Well done on your owls, by the way. I was very surprised to see your results." Wasn't that just the most backhanded compliment Harry had ever heard? His smile tightened. "Sorry, sir, but my lawyer has advised me not to meet with you alone, especially after everything you've said in the Prophet. If you really need to speak with me, I'm sure Professor McGonagall would be happy to accompany me as my head of house." The very woman in question was already making her way over, no doubt curious about what Dumbledore was up to. "Weren't you, Professor?" Dumbledore straightened, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Now, Harry, Professor McGonagall is incredibly busy. There's no need to add to her schedule just so the two of us can have a little chat." "Busy? Nonsense, Albus. I'm perfectly capable of rearranging things if there is a problem with one of my students. What did you need to discuss with Potter? Surely he isn't in trouble already?" She eyed Harry suspiciously, and he gave his best innocent expression in response. "No trouble at all. I merely had a few things I wished to discuss. Truly, Minerva, your involvement is not necessary." "Mrs. Frobisher has strongly recommended that I not speak to you without another teacher present, sir," Harry insisted. "She's worried I might get misconstrued in the Prophet again," Harry said, feigning an apology. "And Sirius mentioned that if you had anything about the war to discuss, you should pass it on to him." Over Dumbledore's shoulder, Harry noticed McGonagall's lips tighten. "Mr. Potter is a minor, Albus. If his guardian and his legal counsel have advised against him meeting with you, I must, as his housemistress, abide by that. If you truly need to speak with Potter, let me know, and I will clear my schedule. Otherwise, I suggest you send a letter to Lord Black." Dumbledore had no response that wouldn't create a scene, especially with half the hall watching. He smiled tightly and bowed his head. "If that is how you feel, Mr. Potter, I can only oblige, though it saddens me to do so. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. I believe you will find what I have to say very enlightening indeed." He then continued toward the head table. Harry glanced at McGonagall, grateful, but she said nothing, merely nodding before carrying on with her day. Finally, able to return to his breakfast, Harry sighed and looked at Susan. "I didn't think he'd try something so blatant," he mused quietly. Opposite him, the Hufflepuff hummed thoughtfully. "Maybe he was hoping social pressure would get to you. You wouldn't want to appear as if there's a rift between you in public." Harry snorted. If he didn't want that, he shouldn't have spent half the summer slandering me in the paper. "Well, there's no worry of that now," Padma remarked, flipping through the morning's copy of The Prophet. "It's even more of a ministry mouthpiece than it used to be." Several of the heirs exchanged grim looks. A ministry mouthpiece was a Voldemort mouthpiece now. "Is there anything useful in there, or—" Neville began, trailing off. Padma shook her head. "It's more of the same. They've suspended Wizengamot meetings until further notice, probably because more than half the seats were absent for the last session. With Voldemort in charge of the ministry, it would be practically suicidal for anyone who didn't support him to step inside the building." Harry felt a surge of relief knowing that Lucius Malfoy had died in the Department of Mysteries last June. If the Malfoy seats had still been under the Dark Lord's control, it would have been just enough to keep the Wizengamot functioning and able to pass laws, with a little intimidation of a few neutral members. Thankfully, Narcissa had placed those seats firmly out of Voldemort's reach, which was the only thing preventing the Dark from gaining true control over Wizarding Britain. For now, the Death Eaters might hold sway over the ministry buildings and their departments, but no new laws or regulations could be passed. It wasn't an ideal situation, but it could have been a lot worse. "Oh, look, Harry," Sully said, pointing to a section of the open paper. "They've put a price on your head already." Harry frowned and reached for Susan's abandoned copy of the paper to see for himself. Sure enough, a small article declared that a reward of 5,000 galleons would be offered to anyone who could capture Harry Potter, on suspicion of conspiracy against the ministry. Harry snorted. "Good to know how much I'm worth, I suppose." "Can they even do that?" Parvati asked, wrinkling her nose. Harry shrugged. "Probably not, but it's Voldemort. He's not exactly playing by the rules. Not that they can send Aurors to the school for me. Or rather, not that they would try, not with Dumbledore and a school full of students standing in their way." Harry knew he'd have to be careful in Hogsmeade and when wandering the school alone, but he doubted any of the students would dare to try anything against him. "I just hate that we don't have a single source of unbiased news," he added, frustration creeping into his voice. "In this country," Susan muttered, her expression darkening. "It's all right for us. We've got people in the know, and we've got Harry. We know the truth. Everyone outside the school, however—" It felt like the previous year, but much worse. "Why don't you bring the Quibbler into the mix, hun?" Daphne suggested to Luna. But the blonde Ravenclaw shook her head. "I would like to help, but something awful will happen to Daddy if he gets involved. The Nargles have told me." Several of them grimaced. They knew better than to ignore Luna's warnings about creatures, especially when they were that explicit. "It'll be fine, for now," Harry assured, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "They don't have enough manpower to kill everyone at the ministry who doesn't actively support them, not without bringing the country down with them. Let them try to convince people to buy into their politics. We'll get them when the time comes." Just under a year until Harry turned 17. They could handle things until then. After breakfast, with a promise to spend time with Draco after lunch, Harry decided to sneak down to the Chamber of Secrets. He happily greeted Salazar's painting and immediately launched into a summary of everything that had happened since his last visit. "Well, you certainly have been busy," the man hissed, amusement evident in his tone. "And you said this is your 6th year now, the year you and your friends will begin to turn 17. There was an odd urgency in his eyes, and Harry frowned. "Yes, why?" Salazar shook his head. "The castle is keen," he replied, as if that explained everything. "You are a particularly powerful group this year. I believe it is eager for a surge of adult magic." Harry regarded the painting suspiciously. That definitely wasn't the whole story. But he knew trying to pry secrets from Salazar was like trying to draw blood from a stone, so he decided to let it go for now. From the sounds of it, Harry knew he would find out sooner or later. "How is your search for my unworthy heir's Horcruxes going?" the painting inquired, and Harry frowned. "Well, the ritual we found here worked. The one in my scar is gone," he replied, explaining what had happened with the ministry and why they decided to eliminate it. Salazar looked pleased. At the end of the last school year, he had been one of the strongest advocates for removing the Horcrux as soon as possible. "The problem is, now we don't know how many others there are or where to find them, if there are even any others." It was possible that Voldemort's snake was the only remaining Horcrux. Salazar frowned in thought, stroking the head of his pet snake. "I wish I could help, but I confess I'm as much in the dark as you are, lad. But do not fear. With how many of the rest have fallen into your path, it seems the universe is on your side. I'm sure that luck will continue." Harry wished he could share that kind of optimism. Chapter 87. Even with free periods added to his schedule, Harry felt just as busy with classwork as he had at the start of his OWL year. Now that everyone in the room was there by choice and had achieved a certain level of competency, all the teachers seemed to have much higher expectations. Snape wasn't the only one insisting on the use of non-verbal magic. All of their spellcasting classes encouraged it, warning that they would be marked down in their newts for any verbal casting. On the bright side, Slughorn was fairly certain that Harry was the greatest student he'd ever had the pleasure of teaching, thanks to Snape's notes. It was strange for Harry to see potions become one of his best subjects so quickly, but he welcomed it. Overall, he was just glad that he was managing the newt-level course load, especially with 6 classes. Part of him had worried that his OWL results had been a fluke, just a product of excessive studying. But he was keeping up just fine, even if the homework was stressful. He was certainly doing no worse than his peers, actually a lot better than many of them. It was a heavy burden, but not heavy enough for people to stop pestering Harry about the HA, nor for the heirs to turn their study meetings into actual study groups. Not just yet. The free periods did make it easier for them to meet, though. With Cassius graduated, Luna and Sully were the only non-6th years in the group, so they gathered during the free period designated for history of magic, which literally nobody took at Newt. Self-study was a much better route than listening to Binns for another 2 years. "There's not much we can do, is there?" Anthony remarked flatly, leaning back in his chair. He seemed to be taking it remarkably well that his parents were now Death Eaters, and that he was technically pretending to be one as well. Harry supposed it helped that most of his friends knew the truth, and the ones who didn't were blissfully unaware. "You know who has the ministry. We turn 17 and we can't take our seats." "There's nothing we can do politically," Susan agreed. "But that doesn't mean we're dead in the water. It just means we need to change our approach." She turned to Harry, her gaze steady. "We're all yours, Potter. You promised me a clear path to the Wizengamot by graduation, so what's the plan?" For a moment, Harry could only stare. Susan was completely serious. With the same determination and Hufflepuff work ethic she had previously dedicated to her future Wizengamot career, she was now ready to follow his lead in the fight against Voldemort. Looking around, he noticed that she wasn't the only one with that steadfast, expectant look in their eyes. This wasn't a room full of people expecting him to take down Voldemort for them. This was a room full of friends, ready to help him in that battle. How had he gotten so lucky to have friends like this? "Well," he started, clearing his throat, "I'm aiming for it to happen in the summer. I'll have my best chance if I'm of age when I face him, with my whole family's magic behind me." Around the table, everyone nodded, as if that made perfect sense. No one mentioned that his birthday was still a long way off, or that all sorts of terrible things could happen by then. "There are a couple of things I need to take care of before we can reach that point, too. So as it stands, we're looking at a summer battle," Susan said, nodding resolutely. "At least it won't mess with classes." Harry snorted. That was one way to look at it. "There's nothing we can do about the world outside the castle," Daphne cut in bluntly. "As much as we'd like to, we can't. There are adults out there who can. Adults we can actually trust. And we're better off leaving that to them. While I hate to admit it, with Dumbledore here, the Dark Lord isn't likely to come after the school, no matter how badly Voldemort wants to get his hands on Harry," Daphne said. "So what can we do?" Ernie asked, puffing himself up indignantly. "Because I'm sure as hell not going to just sit around and wait for the battle to come." "We can train," Harry said firmly, cutting off any potential argument. "Give me until the weekend to get my schedule sorted, and then I'll gather the Harry Alliance back together. Some of our older members might have graduated, but we can work with the ones we've got. The more capable fighters we have when the battle comes, the better." "But what if you-know-who comes before you turn 17? Parvati asked, worry etched across her face. Harry's brow furrowed. "We'll deal with that when the time draws closer. We know he'll be too busy reorganizing the ministry for at least the next few months, which will buy us some time. I'll be honest, everyone, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a long year. But we'll do what we've always done. Prepare ourselves as best we can, and keep trying to undermine both Voldemort and Dumbledore in the eyes of the students." Admittedly, Harry's plans for destroying Dumbledore's reputation were going to be a lot harder now that Amelia and Mrs. Frobisher couldn't set foot in the ministry or leak anything to the Prophet. But that was his problem, not his friends. All they had to do was keep themselves safe. With what felt like half of Gryffindor House pressuring him to hurry up, Harry managed to organize Gryffindor Quidditch team tryouts for the second Saturday of term, right after breakfast. He and Katie met on the pitch in their training gear, brooms in hand, and Harry stared wide-eyed at the crowd in the stands. "Please tell me they're not all here to try out," he croaked, and Katie laughed. "No, not all of them. Half of them aren't even Gryffindors. Look," she said, gesturing to a cluster of Hufflepuff third-years. "Pretty sure they're just here to ogle you, Mr. Chosen One." "Really?" Harry groaned, rolling his eyes. "I thought I was back to being an evil head case again." Katie shrugged. "You were for a while, but then you came back after the summer and everyone remembered how hot you are. So I guess they're back to fawning over you again." Harry felt his cheeks flush as red as his Quidditch uniform, and Katie laughed, giving his shoulder a playful shove. "Get used to it, Harry. Now come on, let's see what they're made of." Despite practically being his co-captain and having been on the team longer than he had, Katie insisted on trying out with the other chasers. While she claimed that most of the crowd was just there to drool over Harry, it was clear that many of them at least pretended to be interested in Quidditch. Harry realized he would need to revise his plans a little. "Okay," he called, his voice magically amplified. "Here's how this is going to go." Splitting the crowd into groups of 10 helped. He needed to see if they could actually fly before diving into anything complicated, and he wanted to check if they were even in Gryffindor House to begin with. It was hard to believe how many people were willing to pretend they wanted to play Quidditch just to flirt with him. Finally, Harry could start the Chaser trials. Although he wanted to give everyone a fair shot, it was obvious to him that Katie and Ginny were in a class of their own. He also chose a fourth-year girl, Demelza Robbins, who showed a lot of potential. There were plenty of complaints from the rejected flyers, insisting he was just picking his friends for the team, but he had little patience for that. "I'm starting the beta trials, and if you're still in the way, I'm not responsible for how many bludgers hit you," he declared bluntly, which effectively cleared the pitch. To his relief, there were more options to choose from than just Kirk and Sloper. They weren't nearly as good as Fred and George, but at least he had some choices. George was certainly better than the two boys who had played in the Ravenclaw match last year, and so were Jimmy Peakes and Richie Coote. A quick glance at Katie revealed her nodding in agreement, which gave Harry confidence in his decision. Finally, after clearing the pitch of all the protesting beta rejects, it was time for the Keeper trials. To Harry's dismay, Ron was giving it another go. Cormac McLaggen was there too, as promised, looking far too self-assured. Vicky stood further down the line from both boys, her jaw set in determination, and Harry had to force himself not to smile at her. He needed to appear fair. One by one, he sent the applicants up to the goal hoops, while Ginny, Katie and Demelza tossed the quaffle around, with Katie getting Demelza accustomed to their flying style. Harry felt immeasurably grateful to have Katie on the team. He didn't know where he would begin training an entirely new squad by himself. Overall, the turnout for the keeper position was as mildly disappointing as the chaser and beta selections had been. The first 5 candidates had little success and headed despondently to the stands, where most of the rejected players, and plenty of students just looking for some entertainment, had settled in. Each time Ron glanced at the crowd, he looked a little greener. Harry recalled Angelina's description of Ron's tryout the previous year. As long as no one was watching, he did fine. Well, plenty of people were watching now. Next up was Vicky. Harry offered her a discreet nod of encouragement. The dark-haired girl positioned herself in front of the hoops, and he blew his whistle, signaling the chasers to begin. The 3 girls didn't hold back. Vicky saved the first 3 shots effortlessly, and even a tricky 4th shot from Katie was firmly blocked. Then, on the 5th attempt, Harry watched in disbelief as Vicky suddenly veered sharply in the opposite direction, letting the quaffle soared through the hoop, and Ginny stared in shock at the goal she had just scored. A low "ooh" rumbled through the crowd. When Vicky landed, she stumbled. Harry approached her, intending to ask what had happened, but then he noticed how dazed she looked, her eyes unfocused. He narrowed his gaze. "Hey, Vicky, stand still for a second," he requested. She complied, though she swayed slightly on the spot, her head cocked curiously. Harry waved his wand over her and cursed under his breath. "She's been confounded," he announced, his voice still amplified by the sonorous charm. Gasps rippled through the stands. "There's no need to make excuses, Potter," McLaggen drawled pompously, "just because your favourite didn't perform perfectly." "It's not an excuse. I'm telling you she's been confounded." Harry recognized the signs well. Snape had ensured he was aware of them after everything he'd gone through with Dumbledore. Rage surged through him, and he turned up the volume of his voice. "I don't appreciate sabotage against the Gryffindor team, and if I find out who's responsible, you can be sure I'm going straight to McGonagall." He glared at everyone in the stands who looked like they might have been in a position to cast as far as the goal hoops. His gaze lingered on Hermione, who sat behind the hoops by herself, her jaw clenched tightly. He had no proof, but his suspicions ran deep. Setting Vicky to one side to shake off the spell, he sent McLaggen up next, and cast a Patronus that soared up to the castle, prompting several people in the crowd to clap. The girls were equally ruthless, but the blonde boy saved all 5 shots, landing with a smug smile on his face. "Ron, you're up," Harry said, gesturing for the redhead to take off. Ron looked like he might be sick, being the last candidate with all eyes on him. He did fairly well. Despite his nerves, he missed the 4th shot, and in his embarrassment, he missed the 5th as well. Blushing as red as his hair, he stalked off the pitch. "So the position is mine, then," McLaggen drawled. Harry grit his teeth. "No, because Vicky was confounded. We're not done yet." As he spoke, he noticed a figure in white bustling across the pitch, and smiled. "Thanks for coming, Madam Pomfrey. I have to say it's been a while since I've been summoned just for team tryouts," the Medi-Witch muttered, shaking her head. "Someone's been confounded, you say?" "Vicky Frobisher," he confirmed, wrapping an arm around Vicky's shoulders as he guided her toward Pomfrey. The older woman observed the way the Gryffindor girl walked unsteadily and waved her wand in the same manner Harry had used. "Yes, definite interference here," Pomfrey said disapprovingly. "Not to worry. I'll have her back to rights in just a moment." She reached into her bag, tutting quietly. Honestly, the length some people will go to for Quidditch. After giving Vicky a potion, the girl's eyes sharpened within moments. She looked at Harry, furious. "You'll give me another shot, right?" she begged. Harry squeezed her shoulder. "Of course, yeah. Are you up for it now?" Vicky nodded, and Madame Pomfrey confirmed that she should be in perfect mental shape. Harry sent her back up to the hoops, relieved that Pomfrey was staying nearby in case of any further issues. Hopefully, whoever had confounded Vicky the first time would think twice about trying again with a member of staff present. Fortunately, Vicky was back in fine form. She saved all 5 shots and returned to the ground grinning. Harry glanced between Vicky and McLaggen. He would love to just give the position back to Vicky, but he knew he'd never hear the end of it. "All right, both of you get up there. We'll alternate penalties until someone misses," McLaggen said, gesturing for Vicky to take the first attempt with a smug grin. Vicky shot him a glare as she headed to the goal hoops. Harry mounted his broom, wanting to keep a close eye on everything happening. Katie took the first 2 penalties, and both keepers managed to save them. Demelza followed, a bit nervous but still making good shots. Unfortunately, neither made it through the hoops. Harry watched as Ginny flew towards Vicky, wondering how much longer this would drag on. They were already late for lunch. After 3 penalties each, there was still no winner. Katie lined up for the 4th round, feinting to the left before throwing at the right hoop. Vicky didn't fall for it, catching the quaffle on her fingertips. By the time McLaggen got into position for his turn, he looked a little annoyed. Katie flew up, feinted to the right, and committed to the throw at the right hoop, while McLaggen lunged to the left. Katie scored. Vicky would remain the Gryffindor keeper. "I demand a retrial," McLaggen exclaimed as the whole team landed. "You only gave her a second round because she fumbled the first. I should have won that." "She fumbled because she was confounded, McLaggen," Harry shot back, struggling to resist the urge to hex the arrogant 7th year. "Madame Pomfrey confirmed it herself, unless you think you know better than her." Madame Pomfrey placed her hands on her hips, eyeing McLaggen expectantly, and suddenly the blonde boy had nothing left to say. "Right then, those are the results. Anyone who doesn't like it can bugger off," Harry called, making sure everyone in the stands heard him. A few groans echoed, but soon everyone began to leave. Harry turned to his new team, finally ending his sonorous charm. His throat felt scratchy, and he coughed. Merlin. I'm glad that's over. Well done today, everyone. I'll let you know when our first practice is, once I've figured out everyone's schedules. He shouldered his broom and blinked in surprise when a small red sweet was offered to him. A cough drop, Mr. Potter, Pomfrey said with a wry smile. You sound like you could use it. He grinned in thanks and popped the sweet into his mouth. Within moments, he felt it soothing his sore throat. Thanks, and I'm sorry for summoning you like it was some kind of massive emergency. I just didn't know what else to do. I'd have had a riot on my hands if I'd rescheduled tryouts after all that. No, you did the right thing, Pomfrey assured him, falling into step beside him as they walked back up to the castle. I'm impressed you could spot the signs and knew the test for it. That spell isn't on the Hogwarts curriculum. Draco wants to be a healer, he explained, the excuse coming easily. He was practicing some medical spells recently and thought that one would be useful. I helped him out, so I became pretty familiar with it. Indeed, I had heard the rumour that you and Mr. Malfoy have buried the hatchet, Pomfrey remarked. I didn't believe it at first, not after the number of times one of you has ended up under my care due to the other. Harry laughed and ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, I can see how that would be a surprise. I hope this friendship with the Slytherins means I shall see less of you, Mr. Potter, though I will admit you did very well at avoiding the need for medical care last year. She narrowed her gaze at him shrewdly. Or at least avoiding coming to me for such things. Harry's stride faltered. That awful blood quill should never have entered this school, Pomfrey continued. Relief washed over Harry. She wasn't talking about any of the other issues he'd gone to Snape for. Just... Harry recalled his punishments at the hands of Umbridge. Oh yeah, none of us wanted to get you in trouble if you had to report it or anything, he said, shrugging helplessly. We handled it ourselves. You were needed for everything else. Pomfrey's gaze softened as she patted his arm. I understand, and I thank you, though I wish you hadn't been put in that position to begin with. As they approached the open front doors of the castle, Pomfrey paused at the threshold. Look after yourself, Mr. Potter, she said, a hint of fondness in her tone. And if Mr. Malfoy is truly planning a career in the healing arts, tell him I would always welcome an assistant when he has free time. If he's interested, of course. Harry grinned at her. He will be. I'll pass on the message. Thanks, Madam Pomfrey. She nodded, and the pair parted ways. Harry headed up to Gryffindor to shower and change out of his Quidditch training gear. He had a team. That was one problem solved. Thank Merlin he only had to do that once. The gates of the pottery stood wide open as Sirius paced in front of them, a scrap of parchment in hand. Andromeda had warned him she was bringing a new family in need of sanctuary, and he was worried they might have been delayed somehow. At last there was the crack of apparition. Sirius whirled around to see his cousin standing with a pair of women who were clearly related, sharing the same curly auburn hair and round, freckled cheeks. The older woman looked wide-eyed and slightly green in the face, while the younger one appeared barely old enough to have graduated from Hogwarts. Good, you got my message, Andy said, greeting him with her arm around the older of the pair. This is Helen Ashford and her daughter Neve, who recently graduated from Ravenclaw. Neve believed herself to be Muggle-born until last week. An inheritance test at Gringotts revealed her to be the rosier heir. Sirius nodded in understanding. There was only one way a Muggle woman could give birth to a rosier heir, and it wasn't a pretty thought. No wonder Helen Ashford looked so scared. I'm Sirius Black. It's nice to meet you both, he said, nodding at the pair. Please, read this for me. He held out the parchment that Harry had written on, showing the address. Niamh Ashford read it first, and a sharp breath escaped her lips as the house came into view. Her mother gasped when she suddenly saw the enormous manor house. "This is the pottery," Sirius said, gesturing grandly with a slight smile, trying to ease the tension for the two women. "I like Harry Potter?" Niamh asked hesitantly. Sirius nodded. "It's his ancestral home, yes. Because of the extensive wards on the property, he's turned it into a bit of a safe house for the time being." Niamh seemed to relax at this information and squeezed her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mum," she assured quietly. "We'll be safe here." Sirius led them up the drive, already considering which of the families in residence might be willing to help the Ashfords settle in. There were a couple of other Muggles living there, parents of Muggle-born Slytherins who would be seen as a disgrace to their noble house. The two women would have to share a room, but that would be fine. They would make it work. For their safety, they had to. Meanwhile, despite Hagrid's insistence the previous year that he didn't mind Harry dropping his class for newts, Harry wanted to ensure there was no bad blood between them. After changing and eating lunch following the endless Quidditch trials, Harry headed back outside toward the hut at the edge of the forest. He knocked on the door, raising his eyebrows when it opened just a crack, one dark eye narrowing at him. Then it swung open fully, revealing Hagrid's smiling face. "Oh, it's you! Come in, Hagrid urged, gesturing Harry inside. The half-giant wore a flowery apron and seemed to be cooking something on his grill. "Who did you think it was?" Harry asked, bemused, as he scratched Fang between the ears while the dog lolloped over to him. Hagrid huffed. "Thought it might be Ron and Hermione. Got a bit of a bone to pick with them. Neither of them are in my class," he added, noticing Harry's surprised expression. "I'm not in your class either," Harry pointed out. "Yeah, but you apologized for it, didn't you?" Hagrid retorted. "Those two? Not a word. After I asked them to help me with Grawp and all." Harry had no idea who or what a Grawp was, and by the end of Hagrid's explanation, his jaw was practically on the floor. "You kept a giant in the forest for half of last year?" he said incredulously. "No wonder you were always covered in bruises." "He's my little brother. I couldn't just leave him there," Hagrid reasoned. "We were doing fine, right up until that Umbridge woman interfered. And then I asked Ron and Hermione. I told them all they had to do was check on him once in a while, see that he didn't get lonely, maybe work on his English if they were up to it. But they didn't go see him once." Harry shook his head in dismay, though he knew that in Ron and Hermione's position he likely would have made the same choice. "I'm sorry, Hagrid, but I'm glad you've managed to get him set up somewhere better now." Hagrid brightened at that. "Yeah, the cave Dumbledore found is great for him." He fussed with whatever he was cooking. "I suppose I'm not really mad at them for dropping my class. It's always a small one at newts. Not many careers involving creatures. I'm more upset they left Grawp on his own for so long." "Well, I'm still not exactly on speaking terms with either of them to do about them, so I'm afraid you're on your own with that one," Harry said with a slight grimace. Hagrid studied him for a moment before responding. I suspected as much. What's this I hear about you and Draco Malfoy being friends?" Harry fought back a smile. "It's a bit of a long story," he admitted. "We've been friends for a while, just in secret. His dad, well, you can imagine how that would have gone if he'd found out." Hagrid nodded, his expression darkening. "After Lucius died and Narcissa made it clear where the family stood, Draco and I decided it was a bit pointless pretending to hate each other when we had no reason to." and Sirius and Narcissa are cousins, so I saw a lot of the Malfoys over the summer. Well, I can't say I'm too fond of him, but he did apologize for the trouble with Beaky and all, and he's behaving himself in my classes so far. Still can't believe he's actually taking care for Newts. Just give him a chance, Hagrid, Harry urged earnestly. He doesn't deserve to be judged for the things his father made him do. Aye, that's fair, Hagrid agreed, nodding. Just then a strange squelching noise came from the corner, and Harry glanced over at a barrel he hadn't noticed before. It was full of huge, white, maggot-like creatures. His stomach turned. What are those for, Hagrid?" he asked, wondering if he should warn Draco about the successor to the blast-ended Scroot. "Oh, I got them to feed to Aragog." Harry frowned in confusion, and before he knew it, Hagrid had slumped into the chair opposite him, sniffling into a handkerchief. "He's dying, Harry. He got ill over the summer, and nothing I do seems to help." Hagrid sobbed, his huge shoulders shaking. Harry scooted closer and patted him on the arm. "I don't know what to do." "I'll do it if he... We've been together for so long." "I'm so sorry, Hagrid," Harry murmured. He couldn't bring himself to feel grief at the thought of the giant spider who had once tried to eat him, finally passing away. But he knew that Hagrid had cared for Aragog for most of his life. Losing a pet was never easy, no matter how fearsome. Hagrid took a deep breath, wiping his eyes. "Circle of life, isn't it?" he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Not much I can do, but just keep him comfortable." "I'm sure he appreciates it," Harry replied softly. Suddenly, the foil-covered tin on Hagrid's grill began to smoke lightly. Cursing under his breath, Hagrid got up to deal with it. Under the foil lay a dozen blackened rock cakes. "Oh, bugger it," Hagrid muttered, scowling as he tossed the tin into the sink, cakes and all. Lost track of time. "Is there anything I can do?" Harry offered, feeling a bit helpless. Hagrid sighed and shook his head. "Nah, I'll be fine. It is what it is." He tugged at his beard. "You can tell me one thing, though, Harry." Hagrid sat back down, watching him with an unusually serious expression. "What's going on with you and Professor Dumbledore? I've been reading The Prophet all summer, and it sounds like he's more than a bit worried about you, kid." Harry frowned despite himself. "Dumbledore, he had a plan for how things were going to go," he said slowly, unsure of how much to reveal. Hagrid idolized Dumbledore so much that Harry couldn't risk the half-giant taking his words back to the headmaster, even out of concern. He thought he had it all figured out, but his plan involved... well, you know how at the end of almost every school year I've had some sort of confrontation with Voldemort. Hagrid flinched but nodded. That was him training me for my final sacrifice. I've gotten older, and I've decided I really don't want to be a pawn in his game, Hagrid. I have other people who truly care about me, who are willing to protect me and teach me how to protect myself. That way, when I do have to face Voldemort, because we all know it's going to be me eventually, I might actually stand a chance at winning. Dumbledore never gave me that. Now he's acting like my refusal to play his games means I'm secretly going dark. He thinks I have Voldemort in my head, controlling me, turning me into a younger version of him." "That's bollocks," Hagrid roared. "I knew you-know-who when he was your age, and you're nothing like him." Harry smiled briefly. "Thanks, Hagrid. I know I don't have him in my head, but Dumbledore seems so convinced that my distance from Ron and Hermione and my struggles in class are all signs of me going evil. I'm worried about what he might do if he thinks I have more of Voldemort in me than I actually do. What lengths he'll go to in order to get him out." Harry knew he was exaggerating a bit, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to give Hagrid something to think about without revealing the full truth about his compulsions. He wanted Hagrid to have another perspective if Dumbledore ever tried to convince him to take action against Harry. "It's gotten worse over the summer. I don't know if it's connected to whatever happened to his hand, or if he just really doesn't like me being friends with Slytherins. Even though none of my Slytherin friends are Death Eaters or even have family members who are. Not now that Theo's dad is dead, anyway," he added quietly. "I don't know what happened to his arm, to be honest with you," Hagrid said, frowning. "He's a great man, Dumbledore. Done some amazing things in his life, but, well, he's still human, ain't he? He still makes mistakes. Maybe he'll come around once he realizes you're still the same old Harry as always." Hagrid sighed again, but quickly brightened up. "And on the subject of you doing well in classes, an O in care made me so proud you did." He reached out with a grin, giving Harry a hearty pat on the shoulder. Harry smiled back, ignoring the slight sting. He didn't share Hagrid's faith in Dumbledore's ability to see the light, but that was all right. He wasn't about to push the topic any further. Harry hoped he might be able to spend the evening with Draco, but it seemed the universe had other plans for him. Before he could even reach dinner, Slughorn cornered him with an invitation to an evening gathering, and Harry had no good excuse to decline. After dining at the Hufflepuff table with an unsympathetic Susan, he made his way up to Slughorn's quarters, bracing himself for a long and tedious evening. The group was much larger than it had been on the train. Clearly, Slughorn had taken the time to get to know the students better and select his prime candidates. Harry was surprised to see Ginny among them, wearing that dangerous smile that hinted she was just a couple of steps shy of hexing someone. That might have been because Cormac McLaggen was trying to chat her up. "Harry!" she exclaimed upon spotting him, relief evident on her face. "Good. I was hoping you'd be here tonight." McLaggen shot Harry a glare before quickly disappearing, still sore about the Quidditch team decision. "Oh, thank Merlin," Ginny muttered. "He's spent the last 10 minutes telling me every Quidditch match he's ever played with his posh cousins, and how it's an absolute disgrace that he didn't make the team." "Wanker," Harry replied, and Ginny snorted. "Why didn't you go chat with Blaise?" Slytherin stood by the buffet table, coolly observing anyone who dared to approach. "I was trying to, but Slughorn was talking to him until just a minute ago," Harry said as he and Blaise sidled over to join him. With a rueful grin, Harry reached for a plate. "He got you too, did he?" "Seems to think I'd be willing to introduce him to my mother," Blaise replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Even if she were looking for husband number 9, I don't think he'd like being chosen." Harry snorted. "Anyone else worth rescuing in here?" He figured if they all stood together, maybe Slughorn would think they were networking and leave them alone. Taking a mouthful of some rather excellent chocolate mousse, Harry surveyed the room. It seemed Belby hadn't made the cut, nor had Neville, which surprised Harry, considering potions masters were always looking for good deals with herbologists. Perhaps Slughorn hadn't spoken to Sprout about her best student. In the crowd he noticed a Hufflepuff girl in the year below Ginny, whose name he didn't know, and a pair of Ravenclaw boys he thought might be brothers. Over by Slughorn was Hermione, no surprise there, given her enthusiasm in his classes. It looked like she was taking full advantage of having a teacher who hadn't spent 5 years growing weary of her need for academic approval. As soon as Slughorn spotted Harry, he extricated himself from the conversation with Hermione, beaming at the green-eyed boy. "Harry, Wonderful, wonderful. Glad you could make it. Ah, Mr. Zabini. I didn't know you and Miss Weasley knew each other. How marvellous. He's dating one of my older brothers, Ginny chimed in, almost daring Slughorn to react poorly. On the contrary, his bushy eyebrows rose and he grinned widely. Ah, one of the infamous Weasley twins, I assume. Yes, I've heard all about those boys. I visited their shop, too. Some excellent products they've got there. Inventive indeed. I must say, I'm quite disappointed to have missed teaching them by just a year. I'm sure they were a delight in class. Harry couldn't help but think that Snape wouldn't have used such a description, and judging by Blaze's smirk, he seemed to agree. Have you tried the tiramisu, Harry? It's simply divine. I've really missed the Hogwarts elves' cooking. Slughorn grinned, patting his round belly, though perhaps not as much as I should have, he added with a chuckle. Anyway, Harry, my lad, now that you're here, I have a book I'd like to show you. A young potions prodigy like yourself will find it very interesting, I'm sure. With surprising strength for a man of his age, he steered Harry away from his friends, chatting happily about a friend of his who authored the book he wanted to share. Harry glanced over his shoulder, silently pleading with Ginny and Blay for help. Blay just smirked, while Ginny waved coyly at him before turning to select a generous portion of tiramisu. Whatever Slughorn knew about Tom Riddle, Harry desperately hoped he would figure it out soon so he could decide how to approach the subject. He wasn't sure how much more flattery he could endure. Chapter 88. On Sunday evening, Harry pressed his wand against the silver plate at the bottom of his H.A. inkwell for the first time that year. By Monday morning, half of his classmates, and many from the years above and below, had a certain glint in their eyes when they met Harry's gaze at breakfast. They were more than ready for another meeting at last. With Dumbledore absent from the castle most days, Harry couldn't think of a better time to start. They were back in the room of requirement now. There was no reason to head down to the chamber, especially now that they didn't have Umbridge trailing their every step. A few faces looked disappointed, but most seemed relieved not to be in Salazar's enormous underground hideaway. "It's good to see you all," Harry greeted, making sure the whole group had arrived. "I'm glad you're all back. It was a long summer." Several sympathetic nods and grimaces met his words. "You've probably noticed we have a few new faces with us. I promise you they're all trustworthy. Most of them were getting HA training in secret one way or another last year." He gestured toward the cluster of Slytherins standing behind him, Draco, Theo, and 5 of the kids from the pottery. With their allegiances now known, there was no point in keeping things secret. Unfortunately, not all of his Slytherin allies could be so open, especially since he'd burned the HA contract at the end of the previous year. "Just how long have you been befriending Slytherins in secret, Potter?" Terry Boot asked, a smirk on his face. Harry shrugged sheepishly. "Longer than most of you would expect," he admitted. "And I'm sure none of you will be surprised to hear that these aren't the only Slytherins I'm friends with. There are plenty more who can't be quite so open about their friendships, so don't start assuming that everyone who isn't in this room is a Death Eater." Several people snorted, Blay among them, a smirk playing on his lips. "So," Harry continued, "I know this group started as a way to ensure we all passed our exams, and I understand we kept it secret to avoid Umbridge's scrutiny, but things have grown far more serious now. There's a war coming." Every face looking back at him was serious, filled with determination. Harry fought the urge to smile. "I'm not going to put another contract in place, but I'm asking you to continue pretending this club doesn't exist. If you know someone who genuinely wants to be involved, send them my way." but we aren't just about passing exams anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, carefully considering his next words. He didn't want to scare anyone, but "I'm not going to force you to fight in this war. No one should be compelled to do that. But I can't promise the war will leave you untouched. We all know how ruthless the other side can be. All I can do is provide you with the tools to defend yourselves, whether or not you choose to confront the fight when it arrives. The headmaster doesn't want me to take this approach. He believes that if everyone sits back and lets the adults handle things, the Death Eaters will be content to leave us kids out of it." He rolled his eyes, pleased to see several looks of disgust among his audience. "So if Dumbledore asks, we disbanded at the end of last year. If anyone inquires, we disbanded." "What's the deal with you and Dumbledore, anyway?" Cho asked boldly, raising her eyebrows at him. "All that stuff in the paper over the summer." Harry grimaced. "Let's just say Dumbledore has been planning for his own glory for far too long to consider that I might not want to be used as a weapon." He hesitated, knowing that half this group didn't know the whole truth, but he hoped that would be enough to spark their curiosity. Still, he didn't want their first session back to devolve into an interrogation. He clapped his hands together, grinning. "Right then, let's get started." Harry had a lot to get through after all. It was a rare evening when he found himself alone in the Gryffindor common room. Normally, he tried to avoid spending too much time there, but Neville and Ginny had gone for a romantic walk by the lake before curfew. Harry had been busy every night that week, and didn't want anyone getting suspicious about where he spent his evenings. Unfortunately, being alone in the common room made him a target for exactly what he was trying to avoid. "I know what you're doing, you know," Hermione said, standing over him with her arms folded and her eyes narrowed. Harry glanced at the parchment in front of him. "My Transfiguration essay?" His tone was teasing, which made her scowl. He fought back a smile, wondering what had sparked her curiosity this time. "All your new friends." "I didn't think much of it until I came across a book about the Wizengamot this summer. But it all makes sense. Susan Bones, Zabini and Greengrass, even Neville. And now you're all cozy with Malfoy, conveniently right after his mum takes over a whole load of seats." As Hermione grew more animated, Harry leaned back in his chair and set his quill down. He was surprised it had taken her this long to piece things together. "Draco and I have been friends for far longer than just this summer," he pointed out. "There was just the minor issue of his dad wanting to kill me, so we didn't think to publicize it." Hermione huffed. "So, he's still exactly what you're becoming, an uppity pureblood who thinks they're better than the rest of us." "I'm still a half-blood, Hermione," Harry replied, but she just rolled her eyes. "A half-blood who's planning on joining the same government system that's been oppressing Muggle-borns for decades. We don't even get a say in how this country is run. We're just... You were expected to just shut up and let the purebloods walk all over us. How could you possibly support them, Harry? How could you think your mother would be happy about that?" It was clear Hermione had prepared a whole speech, and Harry found himself wishing he could send her over to Justin. He wanted her to actually listen to his and Susan's plans for the future of the Wizengamot, but he knew she would probably take everything straight to Dumbledore, if she even paused in her ranting long enough to hear them out. "You have to have control of the government before you can change anything about it," he pointed out patiently. "Like any of them would change a system they benefit from," Hermione dismissed, making Harry scowl. "What do you propose then, Hermione?" he retorted. "Should we all just give up our seats and let the Death Eaters have full control? Or do you think we should hand our proxies to Dumbledore so he can do whatever he wants with this country? Because he's done so much good with the seats he's had for the last few decades." His disdain was evident, and Hermione glared at him, her hands on her hips. "Professor Dumbledore knows a lot more about politics than you and your friends," she spat. Harry couldn't help but scoff. "You're so sure about that, are you?" he shot back reflexively. "Look, Hermione, I don't care what you think of me or my friends, but I suggest you do your research before accusing people of oppression. My Wizengamot seats are part of my family heritage, and I'm not going to ignore them just because you think anyone who isn't a Muggle-born is immediately out to get you. Especially not when you're just jealous I have decent friends who aren't you." He started packing up his books and parchment. His essay would get done much faster in the privacy of his dorm, even if it meant balancing everything on a conjured lap desk. Hermione continued to sputter at him, half starting a dozen different sentences, her tirade completely derailed by his complete lack of interest or defensiveness. "I never thought you'd be such a blood purist, Harry," Hermione declared, her voice rising enough to attract the attention of the few people in the common room who weren't already watching their exchange. Harry rolled his eyes. Fantastic. Now he'd have that added to the rumors about him going dark. "And yet I'm not surprised you're shoving your opinions on people before you even know enough about the subject to understand it properly," he replied evenly, turning away and heading for the stairs to the dormitory. Let that circulate for a while. His reputation couldn't get much worse among those who already thought poorly of him. Severus felt unsettled by the sound of so many voices at Serendu, as he let go of Kerry's hand and scanned the entrance hall. For so long, it had just been him, Remus, and Sirius. Harry during the summer, but otherwise it had been quiet. In fact, for half of the previous year, he and Remus had often been the only ones in the enormous house. Now, Narcissa lived there full-time, along with Charlie Weasley, and the Tonks family visited so often it sometimes felt like they lived there too. Indeed, they were there now. Andromeda, Narcissa, and Sirius were having tea in the kitchen, a scene he was sure none of them had imagined when they were teenagers. Out in the garden, he could hear Charlie, Tonks, and Kingsley. It sounded like they were dueling, with the auras putting the dragon tamer through his paces. "Severus," Narcissa greeted brightly as he entered. "We weren't expecting you home." It still baffled him a little to call this place home, let alone to have people there who might actually expect him to be in it, people other than Remus. "For once, I don't have any miscreants in detention today," he said, a decision he had made intentionally. He hadn't spent more than an hour with his partner since the school year had started back up. Sirius barked out a laugh. "Our godsons are otherwise occupied then," he joked, another baffling aspect of his life, joking around with friends. "Sirius Black," Severus said. "Mooney's up in the library, I think." He tried his best not to blush as both women smiled behind their teacups. Over the summer, he had found it fruitless to keep his relationship with Remus a secret from those who frequented the manor. As far as he knew, Kingsley hadn't figured it out yet, but it was only a matter of time. It hardly made sense for Severus to be living there as Draco's godfather, while still spying for both sides. He had no reason to hide, not like Narcissa. As Remus often reminded him, they were family now. "Kerry will be sending up tea for Master Snape," the house elf chirped from her stool at the counter, where she was rolling dough for what looked like scones. "Thank you, Kerry," Severus nodded at her, and then cast his gaze over the trio of blacks. "Enjoy your afternoon tea. I'm sure I'll see you all at dinner." None of the Tonks family would pass up a free meal from Kerry, and if Ted Tonks finished work at a decent hour, he was more likely to join them than expect his wife and child home. As he left the kitchen and headed for the stairs, he unbuttoned the collar of his robe. Was this what his future would look like? A house full of people who knew, without a doubt, that he was in love with Remus Lupin. People he could trust not to use that knowledge against him. After a lifetime of sneaking around, covering their tracks and lying to most of their friends, it felt unfathomable. He sometimes wondered if Remus felt the same way. But then again, the damned wolf was probably counting down the days until the Dark Lord was gone, just so he could shout his feelings from the rooftops. Severus would never admit to the warmth that filled his chest at that thought. Sure enough, his partner was curled up in his usual spot in the library, a book in his lap and a cup of tea on the side table. He looked up as Severus approached. The sound of footsteps echoed in the room, and the bright smile that spread across Remus's face at the sight of Severus was, as always, enough to make Severus's heart skip a beat. "Severus!" Remus exclaimed, setting his book down. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away this weekend. You've been so busy." "Too busy," Severus replied, sliding into the space beside Remus and leaning in for a kiss. "But I told Harry and Draco to manage on their own for today. They both deserve a break. It seems the transition to Newts is just as jarring for them as it was for us at their age." Remus smirked, happily curling against Severus's side. "I'm sure the boys are grateful. I certainly am to have you home." Severus returned the smirk, kissing his lover once more and relishing the warm weight of Remus pressed against him. Merlin, spending a summer sleeping by his wolf's side, made the first month of school nearly unbearable. "Albus will expect me at breakfast tomorrow," he mentioned, "but I can stay the night as long as I leave early." Remus beamed. Perfect. A second cup of tea appeared beside Remus's, along with a small plate of chocolate biscuits. Remus hummed happily, reaching for both and handing Severus his cup. "So, how are classes going? Have you gotten used to teaching outside your dungeons yet?" he teased, making Severus snort. "It will take more than a few weeks to break that habit," he said wryly. It was a good thing his quarters were still in the dungeons, otherwise no one would ever know how often he had automatically walked toward his old classroom to begin teaching. "Classes are a mixed bag," he continued, nibbling on a biscuit as he reflected on the lessons he'd taught since taking the defense against the dark arts position. "The second and third years are exactly as dismal as you'd expect. A year with Umbridge, and for the older students, a year with Crouch posing as Moody, all too young to." Remus leaned back, a playful grin on his face. "I've been invited to Harry's secret defense club. The first years are appropriately terrified." He smirked, and Severus couldn't help but mirror his expression. "Your legacy continues even without exploding cauldrons," he quipped. Severus pursed his lips. "And what about the fourth years?" "The older students," Severus leaned back, wrapping an arm around Remus's shoulders. It's abundantly clear which of them were involved in Potter's little club. It's quite astonishing, to be completely honest. I had no idea how much work he'd managed to do with them. How quickly they've progressed to be as proficient as they are now." He paused, reflecting on his 6th years, most of whom were already capable of non-verbal casting. A good number of his 7th years seemed more competent than half the auras he'd seen in recent years. Those in his 5th-year classes, who had studied under Potter, could take their Dada Owl tomorrow and easily score at least an E. And while there were only a handful of 4th years who had participated, the difference between them and their peers was glaringly obvious. If the whispers he'd heard were to be believed, the club had resumed once more. At this rate, Potter would be doing half his job for him. "Didn't you talk to him about it over the summer?" Remus asked, raising an eyebrow. Severus shook his head. "By the time I knew I would be taking over the class, we had bigger things to worry about," he replied, "and truthfully, I did not expect it to matter quite so much." He had not anticipated that those students would be so far ahead of their peers. Harry told me he'd taught them the basics: shields, disarming, stunning. He never mentioned the rest. Once again, Harry Potter had downplayed his own skills. "I suppose you weren't there to see them fighting at the Ministry," Remus mused. "Then you might have seen what they're capable of, thanks to Harry." He leaned in and kissed Severus's cheek before swiping another biscuit. "I suppose you're just being even more of an evil git to those who already know the curriculum, just to keep them from getting too much of an ego about it," he teased. Severus pursed his lips. "I am pushing them harder than their peers," he agreed slowly. "But—" here was something he wouldn't admit to anyone other than Remus. "I confess I'm not quite as stern as one might expect. I'm keeping up appearances, of course. I certainly can't praise them for their abilities. But, damn it all, I find I'm actually somewhat proud of the little buggers. They recognized that they needed to take their education into their own hands, and they did so without any of us figuring it out." He glared at his partner. "I blame you for this, you know. I never used to care about most of my students before you shoved your way back into my life." He had only ever approved of a handful of students who were decent at potions and didn't shrink under his infamous death stare. Other than his Slytherins, of course. But even so, he'd never felt this way about students before Remus, before Harry and the boy's earnest desire to better himself, to make Severus proud, and to pass on that knowledge to his friends in hopes of keeping them safe. Remus did his best to look solemn, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. "I'm awfully sorry I brought so much joy into that shriveled-up heart of yours that you're finding it difficult to be a jerk to children." Severus scowled, and Remus chuckled, cupping his jaw for a kiss. "It's not a bad thing to care," he murmured fondly, "especially not in the position you're in now. You may have to hide what you're truly doing, but you've got the chance to help Harry teach these kids to survive." Severus knew that all too well. A Hogwarts defense against the dark arts education was patchy at best, just as it had been since his own school days, ever since the position had been cursed by a young Tom Riddle before Severus was even born. It showed in the Ministry, in their culture, had been easily decimated by the Dark Lord's forces. There was death on both sides, as neither truly had the advantage. Severus might only have a year in this position, but he was determined to cram as much useful information into their teenage minds as possible during that time. "Classes aside," he drawled, cutting off Remus before he could tease him further about his newfound positive emotions towards students, "I'm concerned about Albus. He's planning something." The headmaster had been absent more often than not since the school year began, and on the days he was present, he spent far too much time watching Harry during mealtimes, which made Severus uneasy. "Has he mentioned anything to you about it?" Remus asked. Severus shook his head. "No, which is all the more worrying." Albus still believed Severus was his loyal man. If there was something the headmaster wasn't telling him, something that even he might not approve of, it couldn't be good. Remus's fingers slid into Severus's hair, his blunt nails scratching gently at his scalp. "All we can do is wait, love," he pointed out softly. "Whatever he's planning, we'll face it as it comes. But your position is too precarious for you to go snooping." Remus was right. They both knew it. But that didn't make it any easier for Severus to hear. It was hell working for two masters and trusting neither of them. He desperately hoped Harry's plans would work out, that they would find all the Horcruxes and destroy them, ending the Dark Lord's reign as soon as the boy turned 17. He wasn't sure how much longer he could bear this burden, especially now that he had a life worth living outside the shadows. He was so incredibly tired. Harry hadn't been able to take Draco down to the chamber yet this school year, but the chance finally arose when Snape headed home for the weekend and told them to entertain themselves. He tugged on his boyfriend's arm as they walked down the narrow stone passageway. Unbeknownst to Draco, Harry's heart fluttered anxiously. "So, I know I said we could come down here and train," Harry began, pausing to hiss the command that would open the other end of the passage, revealing the chamber itself. "And we can still do that, if you want to." Draco pulled him closer, his silver eyes sparkling with mischief and a hint of amusement. "I suppose you've got better ideas, do you?" he drawled, his free hand slipping to the small of Harry's back. Harry struggled to push past the sudden haze of desire and refocus on his original point. "I mean, we can do that too," he assured, fighting a smile. "But also, I've finally got permission to make some introductions, if you're interested." The blonde stared at him in confusion for a few seconds until everything clicked into place. Then he gaped. "You mean—" Harry nodded. "Salazar is happy to welcome you into his office." The founder had relaxed a bit once he saw how much care Severus had put into his office, and Harry privately thought it saddened Salazar that he was the last true Slytherin heir. Draco's jaw dropped, his eyes going wide. Yes, of course. You couldn't have warned me sooner," he exclaimed, looking down at his slightly ruffled school uniform. Harry laughed, leaning in to kiss him. "And let you get all worked up about it?" he teased, leading Draco toward the hidden office. Draco seemed to freeze once the door opened, and Harry had to gently nudge him through the doorway. Salazar surveyed them with intrigued dark eyes, a flicker of a smile playing beneath his short beard. "Good evening, Harry, my lad. This is your better half, then, is it?" he greeted, thankfully speaking in English. Harry grinned at him while Draco's cheeks flushed pink. "Yep," he said proudly, wrapping an arm around Draco's waist. "This is—" "Draco, love, this is Salazar," Harry said, gesturing toward the founder. Draco took a hesitant step closer. It is truly an honor, Lord Slytherin," he said reverently. Salazar chuckled warmly. "Welcome to my office, young heir Malfoy. It's a pleasure to meet you. Harry speaks very highly of you indeed." Harry felt a blush creeping up his cheeks as Draco whipped around to narrow his gaze at him. "I'm just going to—" Harry trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the bookshelves. "You two can talk." Draco floundered slightly at that, but Harry encouraged him to take a seat on the sofa. Salazar, sensing the teen's nerves, happily asked him about the state of Slytherin House from a student's perspective. That was all it took. Before long, Draco was chatting away with Salazar as if they had been friends for months, hardly paying any attention to Harry as he browsed the shelves for anything useful. Like Severus, Harry had no doubt that once the initial shock of meeting Salazar Slytherin wore off, Draco would eagerly explore the bookshelves himself. Until then, Harry was content to peruse them at his own pace. All the while, a tiny voice in the back of his mind laughed, imagining what Voldemort might say if he knew how close he'd come to meeting his beloved ancestor, and how much that ancestor would have absolutely hated him. As time went on, life at Hogwarts began to settle into some sort of routine. Harry got used to his classes, figuring out which of his free periods needed to be devoted to homework and which could be spent with Draco for half an hour. He worked out a schedule for Quidditch practice, HA, and training with Snape. At least twice a week he chatted with Sirius through the mirror, catching up on everything happening outside the school. Honestly, there wasn't much going on beyond the expected. The Ministry was essentially off-limits and utterly. The flu network is being monitored, and the auras are under Voldemort's control. It feels utterly useless. The Order is currently working to get all Muggle parents of magical children to safety, especially now that the Death Eaters have access to the student registry and the Muggle-born identification department. Just thinking about the visions I had over the summer of Death Eaters destroying Muggle homes makes my stomach churn. How many of those young children could have been future Hogwarts students? And how many more are being attacked now that Voldemort has the Ministry, ones I'm completely unaware of? The Order can only do so much with the Hogwarts Book of Students, after all. I try not to let it keep me up at night, even as the guilt in the pit of my stomach grows heavier and more painful with each passing day. Thankfully, I have plenty of distractions. I throw myself into my classes and extracurricular activities as best as I can. Mr. Potter, a word, if you please. McGonagall's voice cut through the chatter of students leaving the Transfiguration classroom, catching Harry off guard. He glanced over at her just in time to see Hermione's smug expression as she gathered her books. Had she reported him to their house mistress for some perceived slight? Harry stood in front of McGonagall's desk, waiting patiently until the classroom emptied. She waved her wand to shut the door, and he tried not to fidget. "Don't worry, Potter, you're not in trouble," she assured him, a small smile creeping onto her lips as his shoulders visibly relaxed. "I merely wanted to talk to you. I did a lot of thinking over the summer about the things we discussed at the end of last year." Harry raised an eyebrow, his heart racing. Did he dare to hope? "Can I assume you've come to some sort of conclusion then, Professor?" She huffed, her lips pursing in frustration. "Only more questions," she admitted. Looking back, the way Albus has been your guardian throughout your school years, I should have recognized sooner that things didn't add up. The way he spoke about your home life didn't match how you've acted. The things I've heard from other acquaintances over the past couple of years." Harry winced. That wasn't the part of Dumbledore's plans he had hoped to discuss. "I feel I owe you more than a few apologies," McGonagall continued. Harry tried to brush her off, but she narrowed her gaze. "No, Potter, you have been let down by many members of staff, but I am the one who is supposed to be responsible for you, and I have not fulfilled that responsibility." "Professor, you did what you could," Harry insisted. "You didn't have all the information." His smile tightened. "Dumbledore made sure of that." The stern woman frowned. "Indeed, I am beginning to realize that." She sighed quietly. "I will admit, I don't know how I can help. If I were to go against Albus's wishes—" "You'd lose your job," Harry finished grimly. "No, it's not worth it. Honestly, I have most of it under control. It's just good to know you're on my side, even if you have to pretend to be on his." She wouldn't be the only person limited by their closeness to Albus Dumbledore. "We'll need someone trustworthy to take charge of the school once we get Dumbledore out." McGonagall blinked, and then slowly raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure I don't want to know who is involved in this 'we' you refer to, do I?" she asked dryly, making Harry grin. "Well, I did think the headship might be coming to me in the next few years, though admittedly I assumed it would be due to Albus's age. How—" She paused, clearly struggling with the topic. "How long do you expect this to take?" "He'll be gone by the end of this school year," Harry promised her. Whether that was due to his efforts to discredit the man or the curse on his arm, only time would tell. The brave few who had chosen to stand against the tide. Whether it was fear or apathy, the rest seemed resigned to their fates. McGonagall took a moment, her expression shifting as she absorbed Harry's words. She gave a tight nod, her shoulders tensing slightly. "Right then." She straightened some papers on her desk, and when she looked at Harry, her eyes burned with the fierce determination characteristic of Gryffindor. "Whatever I can do to help, Potter, I shall. You only have to ask." A sharp pang struck Harry's chest, like a knife wedged between his ribs. How different might his life have been if he had heard those words from her 3 years ago, or even earlier. But it was too late for those thoughts. At least he had her on his side now, when it truly mattered. "Thank you, Professor," he replied sincerely. If there were any way to achieve his goals without hurting the people he cared about, without shattering their illusions about a manipulative, selfish man intent on the destruction of magical Britain for his own glory, Harry would have taken it. But there wasn't. The truth was hard, but it was necessary. He could only hope that the rest of the wizarding world would accept it with the same grace. As the term rolled on, the students of Hogwarts began to dread the morning post. The flurry of owls arriving in the Great Hall was not as bustling as in previous years. There were fewer students, for one, but many were too afraid to write. Plenty of students had also cancelled their subscriptions to the Daily Prophet, now seen as little more than dark propaganda and misinformation. Amidst the usual cluster of letters, there were ominous black envelopes. This was a new development following the regime change at the ministry. These envelopes served as grim notifications to Hogwarts students about deaths in their families. They could either be thinly veiled taunts about the demise of a Muggle-born or blood-traitor parent at the hands of Death Eaters, always described as unfortunate accidents, or genuine letters of condolence for children whose Death Eater parents had lost their lives. No one was safe from the threat of a black envelope, except for the brave few who had chosen to resist. Of course, there were those like Harry, those who had no blood family to be notified. This morning, he spotted 4 black envelopes being delivered. 2 headed to the Ravenclaw table, 1 to Slytherin, and the last to a Gryffindor second year. The boy turned the colour of sour milk when the envelope landed in front of him. One of the Ravenclaws fled the hall, sobbing. Harry's stomach churned. He wasn't hungry anymore. Ignoring the concerned look in Neville's hazel eyes, Harry shoved his plate aside and stood abruptly, trying to ignore the heavy gazes of those watching him leave. Were they thinking the same thing he was? Probably. They certainly hadn't been quiet about it in the past. He was Harry Potter, the chosen one. He was supposed to be stopping Voldemort, stopping the darkness before anyone else's parents, cousins, or siblings could die, before any more of those black envelopes could be sent. Each one felt like another nail in his heart, a stark reminder that he was safe at school while the rest of the world was not. More than once, a recipient of a black envelope had screamed at him over breakfast, blaming him for the death of their loved one. Harry never knew what to say in those moments. They were right, of course. He wasn't moving fast enough. He was wasting time going to classes, snogging his boyfriend, and just waiting to turn 17, while outside the castle, the fight continued. Suddenly, a hand gripped his shoulder, and Harry whirled around, ready to glare. The glare faltered at the sight of Draco's knowing, silver-grey eyes. Draco tugged him into an empty classroom, warding the door before turning to face Harry, arms crossed over his chest. "Whatever self-pity you're wallowing in right now, drop it," Draco ordered. Harry grit his teeth. "It's not self-pity," he sneered in response. "I could have stopped this, Draco, or at least helped, if I hadn't got rid of that bloody Horcrux in my mind, and I could have seen his plans. Some of those people might still be alive." Harry thought this every single time the black envelopes arrived. He had led the Order to help so many over the summer by gaining early insight into Voldemort's schemes. How was that fair when attacks continued after that? Draco scoffed. "He was blocking you long before you got rid of it," he pointed out. "You wouldn't have seen anything." He reached out and Harry resisted for just a moment before reluctantly letting the taller boy pull him close. "You aren't responsible for every person he kills, Harry," Draco murmured, his hand running soothingly through Harry's hair. "Thinking like that won't get you anywhere." "I'm the only one who can kill him," Harry retorted, and Draco shot him a glare. "But his followers are doing most of the work, and you're not bound to them at all," he argued. "You may be a key player, but this war is bigger than you. If you want someone to blame, blame Dumbledore." Harry snorted, feeling his guilt falter just slightly. It was true. Dumbledore's insistence on making the wizarding world worship him as everything light and good had caused the shadows to grow more dangerous. He had upset the balance long before Harry had even been born. But Harry was the one who needed to restore that balance, and he wasn't moving fast enough. How many more people would die before he could fulfill his destiny? Seemingly sensing the shift in Harry's thoughts, Draco held him tighter, kissing his forehead. "The Order is doing what they can. Kingsley and Tonks, your godfathers, my mother, everyone is doing their best to help people survive. Nothing can be done until you turn 17 and have your full magic. No amount of hating yourself is going to change that, you ridiculous lion." He smiled against Harry's scar, and Harry leaned into him, a lump rising in his throat. "I should be doing more," he rasped. Draco shook his head. "You're doing so much already. You don't even realize it," he insisted. "Let the rest of us share your burden, all right?" He pulled back, meeting Harry's eyes with a faint smile. "Honestly, Potter, I'm supposed to be the selfish one in this relationship. Stop thinking everything is about you." His tone was teasing, and a startled laugh escaped Harry's lips. Reluctantly, he relaxed into the embrace, trying to shake off the guilt that weighed heavily on his shoulders and filled his chest. He took a deep breath. His boyfriend was right, as always. Harry couldn't make time go any faster. He couldn't summon the remaining Horcruxes with a snap of his fingers. It was war, and people died. He couldn't take that personally. But that didn't stop him from having nightmares about it. It didn't stop him from wondering when the day would come that a black envelope would arrive for someone he knew, someone he loved. It was only a matter of time.